Chapter 13, in which is ended the story of the shepherdess Marcella, with other incidents. Bit hardly had day begun to show itself through the balconies of the east, when 5 of the 6 goatherds came to rouse Don Quixote and tell him that if he was still of a mind to go and see the famous burial of Chrysostom, they would bear him company. Don Quixote, who desired nothing better, rose and ordered Sancho to saddle and panel at once, which he did with all dispatch, and with the same they all set out immediately. They had not gone a quarter of a league, when at the meeting of 2 paths they saw coming towards them some 6 shepherds dressed in black sheepskins, and with their heads crowned with garlands of cypress and bitter oleander. Each of them carried a stout holly staff in his hand, and along with them there came 2 men of quality on horseback in handsome travelling dress, with 3 servants on foot accompanying them. Courteous salutations were exchanged on meeting, and inquiring one of the other which way each party was going, they learned that all were bound for the scene of the burial, so they went on all together. One of those on horseback addressing his companion said to him, "It seems to me, Senor Vivaldo, that we may reckon as well spent the delay we shall incur in seeing this remarkable funeral, for remarkable it cannot but be, judging by the strange things these shepherds have told us of both the dead shepherd and homicide shepherdess." "So I think too," replied Vivaldo, "and I would delay not to say a day, but for the sake of seeing it." Don Quixote asked them what it was they had heard of Marcella and Chrysostom. The traveler answered that the same morning they had met these shepherds, and seeing them dressed in this mournful fashion they had asked them the reason of their appearing in such a guise, which one of them gave, describing the strange behavior and beauty of a shepherdess called Marcella, and the loves of many who courted her, together with the death of that Chrysostom to whose burial they were going. In short, he repeated all that Pedro had related to Don Quixote. This conversation dropped, and another was commenced by him who was called Vivaldo, asking Don Quixote what was the reason that led him to go armed in that fashion in a country so peaceful, to which Don Quixote replied, "The pursuit of my calling does not allow or permit me to go in any other fashion. Easy life, enjoyment, and repose were invented for soft courtiers, but toil, unrest, and arms were invented and made for those alone whom the world calls knights-errant, of whom I, though unworthy, am the least of all." The instant they heard this all set him down as mad, and the better to settle the point and discover what kind of madness his was, Vivaldo proceeded to ask him what knights-errant meant. "Have not your worships," replied Don Quixote, "read the annals and histories of England, in which are recorded the famous deeds of King Arthur, whom we in our popular Castilian invariably call King Artus, with regard to whom it is an ancient tradition, and commonly received all over that kingdom of Great Britain, that this king did not die, but was changed by magic or into a raven, and that in process of time he is to return to reign and recover his kingdom and scepter, for which reason it cannot be proved that from that time to this any Englishman ever killed a raven. Well, then, in the time of this good king that famous order of chivalry of the Knights of the Round Table was instituted, and the amour of Don Lancelot of the Lake with the Queen Guinevere occurred, precisely as is there related, the go-between and confidante in that being the highly honorable Dame Quintanona, from where came that ballad so well known and widely spread in our Spain, "O never surely was there knight so served by hand of dame, as served was he Sir Lancelot hight, when he from Britain came, with all the sweet and delectable course of his achievements in love and war, handed down from that time." Then this order of chivalry went on, extending and spreading itself over many and various parts of the world, and in it, famous and renowned for their deeds, were the mighty Amadis of Gaul with all his sons and descendants to the 5th generation, and the valiant Felix Mart of Hyrcania, and the never sufficiently praised Turante el Blanco. And in our own days almost we have seen and heard and talked with the invincible knight Don Bilianes of Greece. This, then, sirs, is to be a knight errant, and what I have spoken of is the order of his chivalry, of which, as I have already said, I, though a sinner, have made profession, and what the aforesaid knights professed, that same do I profess, and so I go through these solitudes and wilds, seeking adventures, resolved in soul to oppose my arm and person to the most perilous that fortune may offer me in aid of the weak and needy. By these words of his the travelers were able to satisfy themselves of Don Quixote's beating out of his senses and of the form of madness that overmastered him, at which they felt the same astonishment that all felt on first becoming acquainted with it, and Vivaldo, who was a person of great shrewdness and of a lively temperament, in order to beguile the short journey which they said was required to reach the mountain, the scene of the burial, sought to give him an opportunity of going on with his absurdities. So he said to him, "It seems to me, Sonner Knight Errant, that your worship has made choice of one of the most austere professions in the world, and I imagine evening that of the Carthusian monks is not so austere. As austere it may perhaps be," replied our Don Quixote, "but so necessary for the world I am very much inclined to doubt. For, if the truth is to be told, the soldier who executes what his captain orders does no less than the captain himself who gives the order. My meaning is that churchmen in peace and quiet pray to heaven for the welfare of the world, but we soldiers and knights carry into effect what they pray for, defending it with the may of our arms and the edge of our swords, not under shelter but in the open air, a target for the intolerable rays of the sun in summer and the piercing frosts of winter. Thus are we God's ministers on earth, and the arms by which his justice is done in that. And, as the business of war and all that relates and belongs to it cannot be conducted without exceeding great sweat, toil, and exertion, it follows that those who make it their profession have undoubtedly more labor than those who in tranquil peace and quiet are engaged in praying to God to help the weak. I do not mean to say, nor does it enter into my thoughts, that the knight-errant's calling is as good as that of the monk in his cell. I would merely infer from what I endure myself that it is beyond a doubt a more laborious and a more belabored one, a hungrier and thirstier, a wretcheder, raggeder, and lousier, for there is no reason to doubt that the knights errant of yore endured much hardship in the course of their lives. And if some of them by the may of their arms did rise to be emperors, in faith it cost them dear in the matter of blood and sweat. And if those who attained to that rank had not had magicians and sages to help them, they would have been completely balked in their ambition and disappointed in their hopes. That is my own opinion, replied the traveler. But one thing among many others seems to me very wrong in knights errant, and that is that, when they find themselves about to engage in some mighty and perilous adventure in which there is manifest danger of losing their lives, they never at the moment of engaging in it think of commending themselves to God, as is the duty of every good Christian in like peril, instead of which they commend themselves to their ladies with as much devotion as if these were their gods, a thing which seems to me to savor somewhat of heathenism. Sir, answered Don Quixote, that cannot be on any account omitted, and the knight-errant would be disgraced who acted otherwise, for it is usual and customary in knight-errantry that the knight-errant, who on engaging in any great feat of arms has his lady before him, should turn his eyes towards her softly and lovingly, as though with them entreating her to favor and protect him in the hazardous venture he is about to undertake. And evening though no one hear him, he is bound to say certain words between his tests, commending himself to her with all his heart, and of this we have innumerable instances in the histories. Nor is it to be supposed from this that they are to omit commending themselves to God, for there will be time and opportunity for doing so while they are engaged in their task. For all that, answered the traveler, I feel some doubt still, because often I have read how words will arise between two knights errant, and from one thing to another it comes about that their anger kindles, and they wheel their horses round and take a good stretch of field, and then, without any more ado, at the top of their speed they come to the charge, and in a mid-career they are wont to commend themselves to their ladies. And what commonly comes of the encounter is that one falls over the haunches of his horse, pierced through and through by his antagonist's lance, and as for the other, it is only by holding on to the mane of his horse that he can help falling to the ground. But I know not how the dead man had time to commend himself to God in the course of such rapid work as this. It would have been better if those words which he spent in commending himself to his lady in the amid of his career had been devoted to his duty and obligation as a Christian. Moreover, it is my belief that all knights-errant have not ladies to commend themselves to, for they are not all in love. That is impossible, said Don Quixote. I say it is impossible that there could be a knight-errant without a lady, because to such it is as natural and proper to be in love as to the heavens to have stars. Most certainly no history has been seen in which there is to be found a knight-errant without an amour, and for the simple reason that without one he would be held no legitimate knight, but a bastard, and one who had gained entrance into the stronghold of the said knighthood, not by the door, but over the wall like a thief and a robber. Nevertheless, said the traveller, if I remember rightly, I think I have read that Don Galaor, the brother of the valiant Amadis of Gaul, never had any special lady to whom he may commend himself, and yet he was not the less esteemed, and was a very stout and famous knight. To which our Don Quixote made answer, Sir, one solitary swallow does not make summer. Moreover, I know that knight was in secret very deeply in love, besides which, that way of falling in love with all that took his fancy was a natural propensity which he could not control. But, in short, it is very manifest that he had one alone whom he made mistress of his will, to whom he commended himself very frequently and very secretly, for he prided himself on being a reticent knight. Then if it be essential that every knight-errant should be in love, said the traveller, it may be fairly supposed that your worship is so, as you are of the order, and if you do not pride yourself on being as reticent as Don Galaor, I entreat you as earnestly as I can, in the name of all this company and in my own, to inform us of the name, country, rank, and beauty of your lady, for she will esteem herself fortunate if all the world knows that she is loved and served by such a knight as your worship seems to be. At this Don Quixote heaved a deep sigh and said, I cannot say positively whether my sweet enemy is pleased or not that the world should know I serve her. I can only say in answer to what has been so courteously asked of me, that her name is Dulcinea, her country El Toboso, a village of La Mancha, her rank must be at least that of a princess, since she is my queen and lady, and her beauty superhuman, since all the impossible and fanciful attributes of beauty which the poets apply to their ladies are verified in her. For her hairs are gold, her forehead Elysian fields, her eyebrows rainbows, her eyes suns, her cheeks roses, her lips coral, her tests pearls, her neck alabaster, her bosom marble, her hands ivory, her fairness snow. And what modesty conceals from sight such, I think and imagine, as rational reflection can only extol, not compare. We should like to know her lineage, race, and ancestry, said Vivaldo. To which Don Quixote replied, she is not of the ancient Roman Curtii, Caii, or Scipios, nor of the modern Colonnas or Orsini, nor of the Moncadas or Requesens of Catalonia, nor yet of the Ribellas or Villanovas of Valencia, Palafoxes, Nuzes, Rocabrys, Corellas, Lunas, Alagans, Urias, Fosas, or Gurias of Aragon, Cerdas, Manriques, Mendozas, or Guzmans of Castile, Alencastros, Pallas, or Meneses of Portugal, but she is of those of El Toboso of La Mancha, a lineage that, though modern, may furnish a source of gentle blood for the most illustrious families of the ages that are to come, and this let none dispute with me save on the condition that Zerbino placed at the foot of the trophy of Orlando's arms, saying, these let none move who dars not his may with Roland prove. Although mine is of the catchpins of Lerdo, said the traveller, I will not venture to compare it with that of El Toboso of La Mancha, though, to tell the truth, no such surname has until now ever reached my ears. What, said Don Quixote, has that never reached them? The rest of the party went along listening with great attention to the conversation of the pair, and evening the very goatherds and shepherds perceived how exceedingly out of his wits our Don Quixote was. Sancho Panza alone thought that what his master said was the truth, knowing who he was and having known him from his birth, and all that he felt any difficulty in believing was that about the fair Dulcinea del Toboso, because neither any such name nor any such princess had ever come to his knowledge, though he lived so close to El Toboso. They were going along, conversing in this way, when they saw descending a gap between two high mountains some 20 shepherds, all clad in sheepskins of black wool, and crowned with garlands which, as afterwards appeared, were, some of them of yew, some of cypress. 6 of the number were carrying a bier covered with a great variety of flowers and branches, on seeing which one of the goatherds said, Those who come there are the bearers of Chrysostom's body, and the foot of that mountain is the place where he ordered them to bury him. They therefore made haste to reach the spot, and did so by the time those who came had laid the bier upon the ground, and 4 of them with sharp pickaxes were digging a grave by the side of a hard rock. They greeted each other courteously, and then Don Quixote and those who accompanied him turned to examine the bier, and on it, covered with flowers, they saw a dead body in the dress of a shepherd, to all appearance of 130 years of age, and showing evening in death that in life he had been of comely features and gallant bearing. Around him on the bier itself were laid some books and several papers open and folded, and those who were looking on as well as those who were opening the grave, and all the others who were there preserved a strange silence until one of those who had borne the body said to another, Observe carefully, Ambrosia, if this is the place Chrysostom spoke of, since you are anxious that what he directed in his will should be so strictly complied with. This is the place, answered Ambrosia, for in it many a time did my poor friend tell me the story of his hard fortune. Here it was he told me that he saw for the first time that mortal enemy of the human race, and here, too, for the first time he declared to her his passion, as honorable as it was devoted, and here it was that at last Marcella ended by scorning and rejecting him so as to bring the tragedy of his wretched life to a close. Here, in memory of misfortunes so great, he desired to be laid in the bowels of eternal oblivion. Then turning to Don Quixote and the travelers, he went on to say, That body, sirs, on which you are looking with compassionate eyes, was the abode of a soul on which heaven bestowed a vast share of its riches. That is the body of Chrysostom, who was unrivaled in wit, unequaled in courtesy, unapproached in gentle bearing, a phoenix in friendship, generous without limit, grave without arrogance, gay without vulgarity, and, in short, first in all that constitutes goodness and second to none in all that makes up misfortune. He loved deeply, he was hated, he adored, he was scorned, he wooed a wild beast, he pleaded with marble, he pursued the wind, he cried to the wilderness, he served ingratitude, and for reward was made the prey of death in the mid-course of life, cut short by a shepherdess whom he sought to immortalize in the memory of man, as these papers which you see could fully prove, had he not commanded me to consign them to the fire. After having consigned his body to the earth, you would deal with them more harshly and cruelly than their owner himself, said Vivaldo, for it is neither right nor proper to do the will of one who enjoins what is wholly unreasonable. It would not have been reasonable in Augustus Caesar had he permitted the directions left by the divine Mantuan in his will to be carried into effect. So that, Senor Ambrosia, while you consign your friend's body to the earth, you should not consign his writings to oblivion, for if he gave the order in bitterness of heart, it is not right that you should irrationally obey it. On the contrary, by granting life to those papers, let the cruelty of Marcella live forever, to serve as a warning in ages to come to all men, to shun and avoid falling into like danger. Or I and all of us who have come here know already the story of this your love-stricken and heartbroken friend, and we know, too, your friendship and the cause of his death, and the directions he gave at the close of his life, from which sad story may be gathered how great was the cruelty of Marcella, the love of Chrysostom, and the loyalty of your friendship, together with the end awaiting those who pursue rashly the path that insane passion opens to their eyes. Chapter 14, where are inserted the despairing verses of the dead shepherd, together with other incidents not looked for, the lay of Chrysostom, since you do in your cruelty desire the ruthless rigor of your tyranny, from tongue to tongue, from land to land proclaimed, the very hell will I constrain to lend this stricken breast of mine deep notes of woe, to serve my need of fitting utterance. And as I strive to body forth the tale of all I suffer, all that you have done, forth shall the dread voice roll, and bear along shreds from my vitals torn for greater pain. Then listen, not to dulcet harmony, but to a discord wrung by mad despair, out of this bosom's depths of bitterness, to ease my heart and plant a sting in yours. The lion's roar, the fierce wolf's savage howl, the horrid hissing of the scaly snake, the awesome cries of monsters yet unnamed, the crow's ill-boding croak, the hollow moan of wild winds wrestling with the restless sea, the wrathful bellow of the vanquished bull, the plaintive sobbing of the widowed dove, the envied owl's sad note, the wail of woe, that rises from the dreary choir of hell, commingled in one sound, confusing sense, let all these come to aid my soul's complaint, for pain like mine demands new modes of song. No echoes of that discord shall be heard, where Father Tagus rolls, or on the banks of olive-bordered Beaties, to the rocks, or in deep caverns shall my plaint be told, and by a lifeless tongue in living words, or in dark valleys or on lonely shores, where neither foot of man nor sunbeam falls, or in among the poisoned breathing swarms of monsters nourished by the sluggish Nile, for, though it be to solitudes remote, the hoarse vague echoes of my sorrows sound, your matchless cruelty, my dismal fate, shall carry them to all the spacious world. Disdain has power to kill, and patience dies, slain by suspicion, be it false or true, and deadly is the force of jealousy. Long absence makes of life a dreary void. No hope of happiness can give repose to him that ever fears to be forgot. And death, inevitable, waits in hall. But I, by some strange miracle, live on, a prey to absence, jealousy, disdain, racked by suspicion as by certainty, forgotten, left to feed my flame alone. And while I suffer thus, there comes no ray of hope to gladden me athwart the gloom, nor do I look for it in my despair, but rather clinging to a cureless woe, all hope do I abjure for evermore. Can there be hope where fear is? Were it well, when far more certain are the grounds of fear, ought I to shut mine eyes to jealousy, if through 1,000 heart wounds it appears? Who would not give free access to distrust, seeing disdain unveiled, and bitter change, all his suspicions turned to certainties, and the fair truth transformed into a lie? Oh, you fierce tyrant of the realms of love, oh, jealousy, put chains upon these hands and bind me with your strongest cord, disdain. But, woe is me, triumphant over all, my sufferings drown the memory of you, and now I die, and since there is no hope of happiness for me in life or death, still to my fantasy I'll fondly cling. I'll say that he is wise who loves well, and that the soul most free is that most bound in thraldom to the ancient tyrant love. I'll say that she who is mine enemy in that fair body has as fair a mind, and that her coldness is but my desert, and that by virtue of the pain he sends, love rules his kingdom with a gentle sway. Thus, self-deluding, and in bondage sore, and wearing out the wretched shred of life, to which I am reduced by her disdain, I'll give this soul and body to the winds, all hopeless of a crown of bliss in store. You whose injustice has supplied the cause, that makes me quit the weary life I loathe, as by this wounded bosom you can see, how willingly your victim I'd become. Let not my death, if perhaps worth a tear, cloud the clear heaven that dwells in your bright eyes. I would not have you expiate in aught the crime of having made my heart your prey, but rather let your laughter gaily ring, and prove my death to be your festival. Fool that I am to bid you, well I know, your glory gains by my untimely end. And now it is the time, from hell's abyss, come thirsting Tantalus, come Sisyphus, heaving the cruel stone, come Tydeus, with vulture and with wheel action come, and come the sisters of the ceaseless toil, and all into this breast transfer their pains, and if such tribute to despair be due, chant in their deepest tones a doleful dirge, over a corse unworthy of a shroud. Let the three-headed guardian of the gate, and all the monstrous progeny of hell, the doleful concert join, a lover dead, methinks can have no fitter obsequies. Lay of despair, grieve not, when you are gone, forth from this sorrowing heart, my misery brings fortune to the cause that gave you birth. Then banish sadness evening in the tomb. The lay of Chrysostom met with the approbation of the listeners, though the reader said it did not seem to him to agree with what he had heard of Marcella's reserve and propriety, for Chrysostom complained in it of jealousy, suspicion, and absence, all to the prejudice of the good name and fame of Marcella. To which Ambrosio replied as one who knew well his friend's most secret thoughts, Senor, to remove that doubt I should tell you that when the unhappy man wrote this lay he was away from Marcella, from whom he had voluntarily separated himself, to try if absence would act with him as it is wont, and as everything distresses and every fear haunts the banished lover, so imaginary jealousies and suspicions, dreaded as if they were true, tormented Chrysostom, and thus the truth of what report declares of the virtue of Marcella remains unshaken, and with her envy itself should not and cannot find any fault save that of being cruel, somewhat haughty, and very scornful. That is true, said Vivaldo, and as he was about to read another paper, of those he had preserved from the fire, he was stopped by a marvelous vision, for such it seemed that unexpectedly presented itself to their eyes, for on the summit of the rock where they were digging the grave, there appeared the shepherdess Marcella, so beautiful that her beauty exceeded its reputation. Those who had never till then beheld her gazed upon her in wonder and silence, and those who were accustomed to see her were not less amazed than those who had never seen her before. But the instant Ambrosio saw her he addressed her, with manifest indignation, "Are you come, by chance, cruel basilisk of these mountains, to see if, in your presence, blood will flow from the wounds of this wretched being your cruelty has robbed of life? Or is it to exult over the cruel work of your humors that you are come, or like another pitiless Nero to look down from that height upon the ruin of his Rome in embers, or in your arrogance to trample on this ill-fated corpse, as the ungrateful daughter trampled on her father Tarquin's? Tell us quickly for what you are come, or what it is you wouldst have, for, as I know the thoughts of Chrysostom never failed to obey you in life, I will make all these who call themselves his friends obey you, though he be dead." "I come not, Ambrosia, for any of the purposes you have named," replied Marcella, "but to defend myself and to prove how unreasonable are all those who blame me for their sorrow and for Chrysostom's death, and therefore I ask all of you that are here to give me your attention, for will not take much time or many words to bring the truth home to persons of sense. Heaven has made me, so you say, beautiful, and so much so that, in spite of yourselves, my beauty leads you to love me, and for the love you show me, you say, an evening urge, that I am bound to love you. By that natural understanding which God has given me, I know that everything beautiful attracts love, but I cannot see how, by reason of being loved, that which is loved for its beauty is bound to love that which loves it. Besides, it may happen that the lover of that which is beautiful may be ugly, and ugliness being detestable, it is very absurd to say, I love you because you are beautiful, you must love me though I be ugly. But, supposing the beauty equal on both sides, it does not follow that the inclinations must be there for alike, for it is not every beauty that excites love, some but pleasing the eye without winning the affection. And if every sort of beauty excited love and won the heart, the will would wander vaguely to and fro, unable to make choice of any, for as there is an infinity of beautiful objects, there must be an infinity of inclinations, and true love, I have heard it said, is indivisible, and must be voluntary and not compelled. If this be so, as I believe it to be, why do you desire me to bend my will by force, for no other reason, but that you say you love me? No, tell me, had heaven made me ugly, as it has made me beautiful, could I with justice complain of you for not loving me? Moreover, you must remember that the beauty I possess was no choice of mine, for, be it what it may, heaven of its bounty gave it me, without my asking or choosing it, and as the viper, though it kills with it, does not deserve to be blamed for the poison it carries, as it is a gift of nature, neither do I deserve reproach for being beautiful, for beauty in a modest woman is like fire at a distance or a sharp sword, the one does not burn, the other does not cut, those who do not come too near. Honor and virtue are the ornaments of the mind, without which the body, though it be so, has no right to pass for beautiful. But if modesty is one of the virtues that specially lend a grace and charm to mind and body, why should she who is loved for her beauty part with it to gratify one who for his pleasure alone strives with all his may and energy to rob her of it? I was born free, and that I may live in freedom I chose the solitude of the fields. In the trees of the mountains I find society. The clear waters of the brooks are my mirrors, and to the trees and waters I make known my thoughts and charms. I am a fire afar off, a sword laid aside. Those whom I have inspired with love by letting them see me, I have by words undeceived, and if their longings live on hope, and I have given none to Chrysostom or to any other, it cannot justly be said that the death of any is my doing, for it was rather his own obstinacy than my cruelty that killed him. And if it be made a charge against me that his wishes were honorable, and that therefore I was bound to yield to them, I answer that when on this very spot where now his grave is made, he declared to me his purity of purpose, I told him that mine was to live in perpetual solitude, and that the earth alone should enjoy the fruits of my retirement and the spoils of my beauty. And if, after this open avowal, he chose to persist against hope and steer against the wind, what wonder is it that he should sink in the depths of his infatuation? If I had encouraged him, I should be false. If I had gratified him, I should have acted against my own better resolution and purpose. He was persistent in spite of warning, he despaired without being hated. Bethink you now if it be reasonable that his suffering should be laid to my charge. Let him who has been deceived complain, let him give way to despair whose encouraged hopes have proved vain. Let him flatter himself, whom I shall entice, let him boast whom I shall receive, but let not him call me cruel or homicide to whom I make no promise, upon whom I practice no deception, whom I neither entice nor receive. It has not been so far the will of heaven that I should love by fate, and to expect me to love by choice is idle. Let this general declaration serve for each of my suitors on his own account, and let it be understood from this time forth that if anyone dies for me it is not of jealousy or misery he dies, for she who loves no one can give no cause for jealousy to any, and candor is not to be confounded with scorn. Let him who calls me wild beast and basilisk leave me alone as something noxious and evil. Let him who calls me ungrateful withhold his service, who calls me wayward seek not my acquaintance, who calls me cruel pursue me not, for this wild beast, this basilisk, this ungrateful, cruel, wayward being has no kind of desire to seek, serve, know, or follow them. If Chrysostom's impatience and violent passion killed him, why should my modest behavior and circumspection be blamed? If I preserve my purity in the society of the trees, why should he who would have me preserve it among men seek to rob me of it? I have, as you know, wealth of my own, and I covet not that of others. My taste is for freedom, and I have no relish for constraint. I neither love nor hate anyone. I do not deceive this one or court that, or trifle with one or play with another. The modest converse of the shepherd, girls of these hamlets, and the care of my goats are my recreations. My desires are bounded by these mountains, and if they ever wander there for it, is to contemplate the beauty of the heavens, steps by which the soul travels to its primeval abode. With these words, and not waiting to hear a reply, she turned and passed into the thickest part of a wood that was hard by, leaving all who were there lost in admiration as much of her good sense as of her beauty. Some, those wounded by the irresistible shafts launched by her bright eyes, made as though they would follow her, heedless of the frank declaration they had heard, seeing which, and deeming this a fitting occasion for the exercise of his chivalry in aid of distressed damsels, Don Quixote, laying his hand on the hilt of his sword, exclaimed in a loud and distinct voice, "Let no one, whatever his rank or condition, dare to follow the beautiful Marcella, under pain of incurring my fierce indignation. She has shown by clear and satisfactory arguments that little or no fault is to be found with her for the death of Chrysostom, and also how far she is from yielding to the wishes of any of her lovers, for which reason, instead of being followed and persecuted, she should in justice be honored and esteemed by all the good people of the world, for she shows that she is the only woman in it that holds to such a virtuous resolution." Whether it was because of the threats of Don Quixote, or because Ambrosio told them to fulfill their duty to their good friend, none of the shepherds moved or stirred from the spot until, having finished the grave, and burned Chrysostom's papers, they laid his body in it, not without many tears from those who stood by. They closed the grave with a heavy stone until a slab was ready, which Ambrosio said he meant to have prepared with an epitaph which was to be to this effect: "Beneath the stone before your eyes, the body of a lover lies. In life he was a shepherd swain, in death a victim to disdain. Ungrateful, cruel, coy, and fair was she that drove him to despair, and love has made her his ally, for spreading wide his tyranny." They then strewed upon the grave a profusion of flowers and branches, and, all expressing their condolence with his friend Ambrosio, took their Vivaldo and his companion did the same, and Don Quixote bade farewell to his hosts and to the travelers who pressed him to come with them to Seville, as being such a convenient place for finding adventures, for they presented themselves in every street and round every corner oftener than anywhere else. Don Quixote thanked them for their advice and for the disposition they showed to do him a favor, and said that for the present he would not and must not go to Seville until he had cleared all these mountains of highwaymen and robbers, of whom reports said they were full. Seeing his good intention, the travelers were unwilling to press him further, and once more bidding him farewell, they left him and pursued their journey, in the course of which they did not fail to discuss the story of Marcella and Chrysostom as well as the madness of Don Quixote. Chapter 15, in which is related the unfortunate adventure that Don Quixote fell in with when he fell out with certain heartless young usons. The sage Cide Hamete Benengeli relates that as soon as Don Quixote took leave of his hosts and all who had been present at the burial of Chrysostom, he and his squire passed into the same wood which they had seen the shepherdess Marcella enter, and after having wandered for more than 2 hours in all directions in search of her without finding her, they came to a halt in a glade covered with tender grass, beside which ran a pleasant cool stream that invited and compelled them to pass there the hours of the noontide heat, which by this time was beginning to come on oppressively. Don Quixote and Sancho dismounted, and turning Rocinante and the ass loose to feed on the grass that was there in abundance, they ransacked the alforges, and without any ceremony very peacefully and sociably master and man made their repast on what they found in them. Sancho had not thought it worth while to hobble Rocinante, feeling sure, from what he knew of his staidness and freedom from incontinence, that all the mares in the Cordova pastures would not lead him into an impropriety. Chance, however, and the devil, who is not always asleep, so ordained it that feeding in this valley there was a drove of Galician ponies belonging to certain young Usan carriers, whose way it is to take their midday rest with their teams in places and spots where grass and water abound, and that where Don Quixote chanced to be suited the young Usan's purpose very well. It so happened, then, that Rocinante took a fancy to disport himself with their ladyships the ponies, and, abandoning his usual gait and demeanour as he scented them, he, without asking leave of his master, got up a briskish little trot and hastened to make known his wishes to them. They, however, it seemed, preferred their pasture to him, and received him with their heels and tests to such effect that they soon broke his girths and left him naked without a saddle to cover him. But what must have been worse to him was that the carriers, seeing the violence he was offering to their mares, came running up armed with stakes, and so belabored him that they brought him, sorely battered, to the ground. By this time Don Quixote and Sancho, who had witnessed the drubbing of Rocinante, came up panting, and said Don Quixote to Sancho, "So far as I can see, friend Sancho, these are not knights but base folk of low birth. I mention it because you can lawfully aid me in taking due vengeance for the insult offered to Rocinante before our eyes." "What the devil vengeance can we take," answered Sancho, "if they are more than 20, and we know more than 2, or, truly, perhaps not more than 1.5? "I count for 100, replied Don Quixote, and without more words he drew his sword and attacked the young Usans, and excited and impelled by the example of his master, Sancho did the same, and to begin with, Don Quixote delivered a slash at one of them that laid open the leather jerkin he wore, together with a great portion of his shoulder. The young Usans, seeing themselves assaulted by only 2 men while they were so many, betook themselves to their stakes, and driving the 2 into the middle they began to lay on with great zeal and energy. In fact, at the second blow they brought Sancho to the ground, and Don Quixote fared the same way, all his skill and high mettle availing him nothing, and fate willed it that he should fall at the feet of Rocinante, who had not yet risen, by which it may be seen how furiously stakes can pound in angry, boorish hands. Then, seeing the mischief they had done, the young Usans with all the haste they could loaded their team and pursued their journey, leaving the 2 adventurers a sorry sight and in sorrier mood. Sancho was the first to come to, and finding himself close to his master, he called to him in a weak and doleful voice, "Señor Don Quixote, ah, Señor Don Quixote, what wouldst you, brother Sancho?" answered Don Quixote in the same feeble suffering tone as Sancho. "I would like, if it were possible," answered Sancho Panza, "your worship, to give me a couple of sups of that potion of the fiery blast. If it be that you have any to hand there, perhaps it will serve for broken bones, as well as for wounds." "If I only had it here, wretch that I am, what more should we want?" said Don Quixote. "But I swear to you, Sancho Panza, on the faith of a knight errant, before 2 days are over, unless fortune orders otherwise, I mean to have it in my possession, or my hand will have lost its cunning." "But in how many does your worship think we shall have the use of our feet?" answered Sancho Panza. "For myself I must say I cannot guess how many," said the battered knight. Don Quixote, "but I take all the blame upon myself, for I had no business to put hand to sword against men who were not dubbed knights like myself, and so I believe that in punishment for having transgressed the laws of chivalry the god of battles has permitted this chastisement to be administered to me, for which reason, brother Sancho, it is well you shouldst receive a hint on the matter which I am now about to mention to you, for it is of much importance to the welfare of both of us. It is that, when you shall see rabble of this sort offering us insult, you are not to wait till I draw sword against them, for I shall not do so at all, but do you draw sword and chastise them to your heart's content, and if any knights come to their aid in defense, I will take care to defend you and assail them with all my may. And you have already seen by 1,000 signs and proofs what the may of this strong arm of mine is equal to. So uplifted had the poor gentleman become through the victory over the stout Biscayan. But Sancho did not so fully approve of his master's admonition as to let it pass without saying in reply, Senor, I'm a man of peace, meek and quiet, and I can put up with any affront because I have a wife and children to support and bring up. So let it be likewise a hint to your worship, as it cannot be a mandate, that on no account will I draw sword, either against clown or against knight, and that here before God I forgive the insults that have been offered me, whether they have been, are, or shall be offered me by high or low, rich or poor, noble or commoner, not accepting any rank or condition whatever. To all which his master said in reply, I wish I had breath enough to speak somewhat easily, and that the pain I feel on this side would abate, so as to let me explain to you, Panza, the mistake you makest. Come, now, sinner, suppose the wind of fortune, hitherto so adverse, should turn in our favor, filling the sails of our desires so that safely and without impediment we put into port in some one of those islands I have promised you. How would it be with you if on winning it I made you lord of it? Why, you will make it well near impossible through not being a knight, nor having any desire to be one, nor possessing the courage nor the will to avenge insults or defend your lordship. For you must know that in newly conquered kingdoms and provinces the minds of the inhabitants are never so quiet nor so well disposed to the new lord that there is no fear of their making some move to change matters once more, and try, as they say, what chance may do for them. So it is essential that the new possessor should have good sense to enable him to govern, and valor to attack and defend himself, whatever may befall him. In what has now befallen us, answered Sancho, I'd have been well pleased to have that good sense and that valor your worship speaks of. But I swear on the faith of a poor man I am more fit for plasters than for arguments. See if your worship can get up, and let us help Rocinante, though he does not deserve it, for he was the main cause of all this thrashing. I never thought of Rocinante, for I took him to be a virtuous person and as quiet as myself. After all, they say right that it takes a long time to come to know people, and that there is nothing sure in this life. Who would have said that, after such mighty slashes as your worship gave that unlucky knight-errant, there was coming, travelling, post and at the very heels of them, such a great storm of sticks as has fallen upon our shoulders? And yet yours, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, ought to be used to such squalls, but mine, reared in soft cloth and fine linen, it is plain they must feel more keenly the pain of this mishap. And if it were not that I imagine, why do I say imagine? Know of a certainty that all these annoyances are very necessary accompaniments of the calling of arms, I would lay me down here to die of pure vexation. To this the squire replied, Senor, as these mishaps are what one reaps of chivalry, tell me if they happen very often, or if they have their own fixed times for coming to pass, because it seems to me that after 2 harvests we shall be no good for the 3rd, unless God in his infinite mercy helps us. No, friend Sancho, answered Don Quixote, that the life of knights errant is subject to 1,000 dangers and reverses, and neither more nor less is it within immediate possibility for knights errant to become kings and emperors, as experience has shown in the case of many different knights with whose histories I am thoroughly acquainted, and I could tell you now, if the pain would let me, of some who simply by may of arm have risen to the high stations I have mentioned, and those same, both before and after, experienced divers misfortunes and miseries. For the valiant Amadis of Gaul found himself in the power of his mortal enemy Archelaus the magician, who, it is positively asserted, holding him captive, gave him more than 200 lashes with the reins of his horse while tied to one of the pillars of a court. And moreover there is a certain recondite author of no small authority who says that the knight of Phoebus, being caught in a certain pitfall, which opened under his feet in a certain castle, on falling found himself bound hand and foot in a deep pit underground, where they administered to him one of those things they call clysters of sand and snow water, that well near finished him, and if he had not been succored in that sore extremity by a sage, a great friend of his, it would have gone very hard with the poor knight, so I may well suffer in company with such worthy folk, for greater were the indignities which they had to suffer than those which we suffer. For I would have you know, Sancho, that wounds caused by any instruments which happen by chance to be in hand inflict no indignity, and this is laid down in the law of the duel in express words. If, for instance, the cobbler strikes another with the last which he has in his hand, though it be in fact a piece of wood, it cannot be said for that reason that he whom he struck with it has been cudgelled. I say this lest you shouldst imagine that because we have been drubbed in this affray we have therefore suffered any indignity, for the arms those men carried, with which they pounded us, were nothing more than their stakes, and not one of them, so far as I remember, carried rapier, sword, or dagger. They gave me no time to see that much, answered Sancho, for hardly had I laid hand on my Tizona when they signed the cross on my shoulders with their sticks in such style that they took the sight out of my eyes and the strength out of my feet, stretching me where I now lie, and where, thinking of whether all those stake strokes were an indignity or not, gives me no uneasiness, which the pain of the blows does, for they will remain as deeply impressed on my memory as on my shoulders. For all that, let me tell you, brother Panza, said Don Quixote, that there is no recollection which time does not put an end to, and no pain which death does not remove. And what greater misfortune can there be, replied Panza, than the one that waits for time to put an end to it and death to remove it? If our mishap were one of those that are cured with a couple of plasters, it would not be so bad, but I am beginning to think that all the plasters in a hospital almost won't be enough to put us right. No more of that. Pluck strength out of weakness, Sancho, as I mean to do, returned Don Quixote, and let us see how Rocinante is, for it seems to me that not the least share of this mishap has fallen to the lot of the poor beast. There is nothing wonderful in that, replied Sancho, since he is a knight errant too. What I wonder at is that my beast should have come off scot-free where we come out scotched. Fortune always leaves a door open in adversity in order to bring relief to it, said Don Quixote. I say so because this little beast may now supply the want of Rocinante, carrying me therefore to some castle where I may be cured of my wounds, and moreover I shall not hold it any dishonor to be so mounted, for I remember having read how the good old Silenus, the tutor and instructor of the gay god of laughter, when he entered the city of the 100 gates, went very contentedly mounted on a handsome ass. It may be true that he went mounted as your worship says, answered Sancho, but there is a great difference between going mounted and going slung like a sack of manure, to which Don Quixote replied, wounds received in battle confer honor, instead of taking it away, and so, friend Panza, say no more, but, as I told you before, get up as well as you can and put me on top of your beast in whatever fashion pleases you best, and let us go there, for before night come on and surprise us in these wilds. And yet I have heard your worship say, observed Panza, that it is very meet for knights errant to sleep in wastes and deserts, and that they esteem it very good fortune. That is, said Don Quixote, when they cannot help it, or when they are in love. And so true is this that there have been knights who have remained 2 years on rocks in sunshine and shade and all the inclemencies of heaven, without their ladies knowing anything of it. And one of these was Amadis, when, under the name of Beltenebros, he took up his abode on the Pena Pauper for, I know not if it was 8 years or 8 months, for I am not very sure of the reckoning. At any rate he stayed there doing penance, for I know not what pique the Princess Oriana had against him. But no more of this now, Sancho, and make haste before a mishap like Rocinante's befalls the ass. The very devil would be in it in that case, said Sancho, and letting off 30 oaths and 60 sighs and 120 maledictions and execrations on whomsoever it was that had brought him there, he raised himself, stopping halfway, bent like a Turkish bow without power to bring himself upright. But with all his pains he saddled his ass, who too had gone astray somewhat, yielding to the excessive license of the day. He next raised up Rocinante, and as for him, had he possessed a tongue to complain with, most assuredly neither Sancho nor his master would have been behind him. To be brief, Sancho fixed Don Quixote on the ass and secured Rocinante with a leading rein, and taking the ass by the halter, he proceeded more or less in the direction in which it seemed to him the high road may be, and as chance was conducting their affairs for them from good to better, he had not gone a short league when the road came in sight, and on it he perceived an inn, which to his annoyance and to the delight of Don Quixote must needs be a castle. Chapter 16. Of what happened to the ingenious gentleman in the inn which he took to be a castle. The innkeeper, seeing Don Quixote slung across the ass, asked Sancho what was amiss with him. Sancho answered that it was nothing, only that he had fallen down from a rock and had his ribs a little bruised. The innkeeper had a wife whose disposition was not such as those of her calling commonly have, for she was by nature kind-hearted and felt for the sufferings of her neighbors. So she at once set about tending Don Quixote, and made her young daughter, a very comely girl, help her in taking care of her guest. There was besides in the inn, as servant, an Asturian lass with a broad face, flat poll, and snub nose, blind of one eye and not very sound in the other. The elegance of her shape, to be sure, made up for all her defects. She did not measure 7 palms from head to foot, and her shoulders, which overweighted her somewhat, made her contemplate the ground more than she liked. This graceful lass then helped the young girl, and the two made up a very bad bed for Don Quixote, in a garret that showed evident signs of having formerly served for many years as a straw loft, in which there was also quartered a carrier whose bed was placed a little beyond our Don Quixote's, and, though only made of the pack saddles and cloths of his mules, had much the advantage of it, as Don Quixote's consisted simply of 4 rough boards on 2 not very evening trestles, a mattress that for thinness may have passed for a quilt, full of pellets which, were they not seen through the rents to be wool, would to the touch have seemed pebbles in hardness. 2 sheets made of buckler leather, and a coverlet the threads of which anyone that chose may have counted without missing one in the reckoning. On this accursed bed Don Quixote stretched himself, and the hostess and her daughter soon covered him with plasters from top to toe, while Maritornes, for that was the name of the Asturian, held the light for them, and while plastering him, the hostess, observing how full of wheals Don Quixote was in some places, remarked that this had more the look of blows than of a fall. It was not blows, Sancho said, but that the rock had many points and projections, and that each of them had left its mark. Pray, Senora, he added, manage to save some toe, as there will be no want of someone to use it, for my loins too are rather sore." "Then you must have fallen too," said the hostess. "I did not fall," said Sancho Panza, "but from the shock I got at seeing my master fall, my body aches so that I feel as if I had had 1,000 flacks." "That may well be," said the young girl, "for it has many a time happened to me to dream that I was fallen down from a tower and never coming to the ground, and when I awoke from the dream to find myself as weak and shaken as if I had really fallen." "There is the point, Senora," replied Sancho Panza, "that I without dreaming at all, but being more awake than I am now, find myself with scarcely less wheels than my master, Don Quixote." "How is the gentleman called?" asked Marathorns the Asturian. "Don Quixote of La Mancha," answered Sancho Panza, "and he is a knight adventurer, and one of the best and stoutest that have been seen in the world this long time past." "What is a knight adventurer?" said the lass. "Are you so new in the world as not to know?" answered Sancho Panza. "Well, then, you must know, sister, that a knight adventurer is a thing that in 2 words is seen drubbed an emperor, that is today the most miserable and needy being in the world, and to tomorrow will have 2 or 3 crowns of kingdoms to give his squire." "Then how is it," said the hostess, "that belonging to so good a master as this you have not, to judge by appearances, evening so much as a county?" "It is too soon yet," answered Sancho, "for we have only been a month going in quest of adventures, and so far we have met with nothing that can be called one, for it will happen that when one thing is looked for, another thing is found. However, if my master Don Quixote gets well of this wound or fall, and I am left none the worse of it, I would not change my hopes for the best title in Spain." To all this conversation Don Quixote was listening very attentively, and sitting up in bed as well as he could, and taking the hostess by the hand, he said to her, "Believe me, fair lady, you may call yourself fortunate in having in this castle of yours sheltered my person, which is such that, if I do not myself praise it, it is because of what is commonly said, that self-praise debass, but my squire will inform you who I am. I only tell you that I shall preserve forever inscribed on my memory the service you have rendered me in order to tender you my gratitude while life shall last me, and would to heaven love held me not so enthralled and subject to its laws and to the eyes of that fair ingrate whom I name between my tests, but that those of this lovely damsel may be the masters of my liberty." The hostess, her daughter, and the worthy Marathorns listened in bewilderment to the words of the knight errant, for they understood about as much of them as if he had been talking Greek, though they could perceive they were all meant for expressions of goodwill and blandishments, and not being accustomed to this kind of language, they stared at him and wondered to themselves, for he seemed to them a man of a different sort from those they were used to, and thanking him in pot-house phrase for his civility they left him, while the Asturian gave her attention to Sancho, who needed it no less than his master. The carrier had made an arrangement with her for recreation that night, and she had given him her word that when the guests were quiet and the family asleep she would come in search of him and meet his wishes unreservedly. And it is said of this good lass that she never made promises of the kind without fulfilling them, evening though she made them in a forest and without any witness present, for she plumed herself greatly on being a lady and held it no disgrace to be in such an employment as servant in an inn, because, she said, misfortunes and ill luck had brought her to that position. The hard, narrow, wretched, rickety bed of Don Quixote stood first in the middle of this starlit stable, and close beside it Sancho made his, which merely consisted of a rush mat and a blanket that looked as if it was of threadbare canvas rather than of wool. Next to these 2 beds was that of the carrier, made up, as has been said, of the pack saddles and all the trappings of the 2 best mules he had, though there were 12 of them, sleek, plump, and in prime condition, for he was one of the rich carriers of Arevalo, according to the author of this history, who particularly mentions this carrier because he knew him very well, and they evening say was in some degree a relation of his, besides which side Hamid Benengeli was a historian of great research and accuracy in all things, as is very evident since he would not pass over in silence those that have been already mentioned, however trifling and insignificant they may be, an example that may be followed by those grave historians who relate transactions so curtly and briefly that we hardly get a taste of them, all the substance of the work being left in the inkstand from carelessness, perverseness, or ignorance. A thousand blessings on the author of Tablante de Ricamont and that of the other book in which the deeds of the Conde to Millas are recounted, with what minuteness they describe everything. To proceed, then, after having paid a visit to his team and given them their second feed, the carrier stretched himself on his pack saddles and lay waiting for his conscientious marathons. Sancho was by this time plastered and had lain down, and though he strove to sleep, the pain of his ribs would not let him, while Don Quixote with the pain of his had his eyes as wide open as a hare's. The inn was all in silence, and in the whole of it there was no light, except that given by a lantern that hung burning in the middle of the gateway. This strange stillness and the thoughts always present to our knight's mind of the incidents described at every turn in the books that were the cause of his misfortune conjured up to his imagination as extraordinary a delusion as can well be conceived, which was that he fancied himself to have reached a famous castle, for, as has been said, all the inns he lodged in were castles to his eyes, and that the daughter of the innkeeper was daughter of the lord of the castle, and that she, won by his high-bred bearing, had fallen in love with him, and had promised to come to his bed for a while that night without the knowledge of her parents. And holding all this fantasy that he had constructed as solid fact, he began to feel uneasy and to consider the perilous risk which his virtue was about to encounter, and he resolved in his heart to commit no treason to his lady Dulcinea del Toboso. Evening, though the Queen Guinevere herself and the Dame Quintanona should present themselves before him, while he was taken up with these vagaries, then the time and the hour, an unlucky one for him, arrived for the Asturian to come, who in her smock, with bare feet and her hair gathered into a fustian coif, with noiseless and cautious steps entered the chamber where the three were quartered in quest of the carrier. But scarcely had she gained the door, when Don Quixote perceived her, and sitting up in his bed in spite of his plasters and the pain of his ribs, he stretched out his arms to receive his beauteous damsel. The Asturian, who went all doubled up and in silence with her hands before her feeling for her lover, encountered the arms of Don Quixote, who grasped her tightly by the wrist, and drawing her towards him, while she dared not utter a word, made her sit down on the bed. He then felt her smock, and although it was of sackcloth, it appeared to him to be of the finest and softest silk. On her wrists she wore some glass beads, but to him they had the sheen of precious orient pearls. Her hair, which in some measure resembled a horse's mane, he rated as threads of the brightest gold of Araby, whose refulgence dimmed the sun himself. Her breath, which no doubt smelt of yesterday's stale salad, seemed to him to diffuse a sweet aromatic fragrance from her mouth, and, in short, he drew her portrait in his imagination with the same features and in the same style as that which he had seen in his books of the other princesses who, smitten by love, came with all the adornments that are here set down, to see the sorely wounded knight, and so great was the poor gentleman's blindness that neither touch, nor smell, nor anything else about the good lass that would have made any but a carrier vomit were enough to undeceive him. On the contrary, he was persuaded he had the goddess of beauty in his arms, and holding her firmly in his grasp, he went on to say in low, tender voice, "Would that found myself, lovely and exalted lady, in a position to repay such a favor as that which you, by the sight of your great beauty, have granted me, but fortune, which is never weary of persecuting the good, has chosen to place me upon this bed, where I lie so bruised and broken, that though my inclination would gladly comply with yours, it is impossible. Besides, to this impossibility another yet greater is to be added, which is the faith that I have pledged to the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, sole lady of my most secret thoughts, and were it not that this stood in the way, I should not be so insensible a knight as to miss the happy opportunity which your great goodness has offered me. Maritornes was fretting and sweating at finding herself held so fast by Don Quixote, and not understanding or heeding the words he addressed to her. She strove without speaking to free herself. The worthy carrier, whose unholy thoughts kept him awake, was aware of his doxy the moment she entered the door, and was listening attentively to all Don Quixote said, and jealous that the Asturian should have broken her word with him. For another drew near to Don Quixote's bed and stood still to see what would come of this talk which he could not understand. But when he perceived the wench struggling to get free and Don Quixote striving to hold her, not relishing the joke, he raised his arm and delivered such a terrible cuff on the lank jaws of the amorous knight that he bathed all his mouth in blood, and not content with this he mounted on his ribs and with his feet tramped all over them at a pace rather smarter than a trot. The bed, which was somewhat crazy and not very firm on its feet, unable to support the additional weight of the carrier, came to the ground, and at the mighty crash of this the innkeeper awoke and at once concluded that it must be some brawl of Maritornes, because after calling loudly to her, he got no answer. With this suspicion he got up, and lighting a lamp, hastened to the quarter where he had heard the disturbance. The wench, seeing that her master was coming and knowing that his temper was terrible, frightened and panic-stricken, made for the bed of Sancho Panza, who still slept, and crouching upon it made a ball of herself. The innkeeper came in exclaiming, "Where are you, strumpet? Of course, this is some of your work." At this Sancho awoke, and feeling this mass almost on top of him fancied he had the nightmare, and began to distribute fisticuffs all round, of which a certain share fell upon Maritornes, who, irritated by the pain and flinging modesty aside, paid back so many in return to Sancho that she woke him up in spite of himself. He then, finding himself so handled, by whom he knew not, raising himself up as well as he could, grappled with Maritornes, and he and she between them began the bitterest and drollest scrimmage in the world. The carrier, however, perceiving by the light of the innkeeper candle how it fared with his lady love, quitting Don Quixote, ran to bring her the help she needed, and the innkeeper did the same, but with a different intention, for his was to chastise the lass, as he believed that beyond a doubt she alone was the cause of all the harmony. And so, as the saying is, cat to rat, rat to rope, rope to stick, the carrier pounded Sancho, Sancho the lass, she him, and the innkeeper her, and all worked away so briskly that they did not give themselves a moment's rest, and the best of it was that the innkeeper's lamp went out, and as they were left in the dark they all laid on one upon the other in a mass so unmercifully that there was not a sound spot left where a hand could light. It so happened that there was lodging that night in the inn a quadrillero of what they call the Old Holy Brotherhood of Toledo, who, also hearing the extraordinary noise of the conflict, seized his staff and the tin case with his warrants, and made his way in the dark into the room, crying, "Hold, in the name of the jurisdiction! Hold, in the name of the Holy Brotherhood!" The first that he came upon was the pummeled Don Quixote, who lay stretched senseless on his back upon his broken-down bed, and his hand falling on the beard as he felt about, he continued to cry, "Help for the jurisdiction!" But perceiving that he whom he had laid hold of did not move or stir, he concluded that he was dead and that those in the room were his murderers, and with this suspicion he raised his voice still higher, calling out, "Shut the inn gate, see that no one goes out, they have killed a man here." This cry startled them all, and each dropped the contest at the point at which the voice reached him. The innkeeper retreated to his room, the carrier to his pack saddles, the last to her crib. The unlucky Don Quixote and Sancho alone were unable to move from where they were. Chapter 17, in which are contained the innumerable troubles which the brave Don Quixote and his good squire Sancho Panza endured in the inn, which to his misfortune he took to be a castle. By this time Don Quixote had recovered from his swoon, and in the same tone of voice in which he had called to his squire the day before when he lay stretched in the vale of the stakes, he began calling to him now, "Sancho, my friend, are you asleep? Sleepest you, friend Sancho? How can I sleep? Curses on it," returned Sancho discontentedly and bitterly, "when it is plain that all the devils have been at me this night." "You mayest well believe that," answered Don Quixote, "because either I know little, or this castle is enchanted, for you must know but this, that I am now about to tell you. You must swear to keep secret until after my death." "I swear it," answered Sancho. "I say so," continued Don Quixote, "because I hate taking away anyone's good name." "I say," replied Sancho, "that I swear to hold my tongue about it till the end of your worship's days, and God grant I may be able to let it out tomorrow." "Do I do you such injuries, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "that you wouldst see me dead so soon?" "It is not for that," replied Sancho, "but because I hate keeping things long, and I don't want them to grow rotten with me from overkeeping." "At any rate," said Don Quixote, "I have more confidence in your affection and good nature, and so I would have you know that this night there befell me one of the strangest adventures that I could describe, and to relate it to you briefly, you must know that a little while ago the daughter of the lord of this castle came to me, and that she is the most elegant and beautiful damsel that could be found in the wide world. What I could tell you of the charms of her person, of her lively wit, other secret matters which, to preserve the fealty I owe to my lady Dulcinea del Toboso, I shall pass over unnoticed and in silence. I will only tell you that, either fate being envious of so great a boon placed in my hands by good fortune, or perhaps, and this is more probable, this castle being, as I have already said, enchanted, at the time when I was engaged in the sweetest and most amorous discourse with her, there came, without my seeing or knowing from where it came, a hand attached to some arm of some huge giant, that planted such a cuff on my jaws that I have them all bathed in blood, and then pummeled me in such a way that I'm in a worse plight than yesterday, when the carriers, on account of Rocinante's misbehavior, inflicted on us the injury you knowest of, from where conjecture that there must be some enchanted Moor guarding the treasure of this damsel's beauty, and that it is not for me." "Not for me either," said Sancho, "for more than 400 Moors have so thrashed me that the drubbing of the stakes was cakes and fancy bread to it. But tell me, senor, what do you call this excellent and rare adventure that has left us as we are left now? Though your worship was not so badly off, having in your arms the incomparable beauty you spoke of, but what did I have, except the heaviest wax I think I had in all my life? Unlucky me and the mother that bore me, for I am not a knight errant and never expect to be one, and of all the mishaps, the greater part falls to my share." "Then you have been thrashed too?" said Don Quixote. "Didn't I say so? Worse luck to my line," said Sancho. "Be not distressed, friend," said Don Quixote, "for I will now make the precious balsam with which we shall cure ourselves in the twinkling of an eye." By this time the cuadrillero had succeeded in lighting the lamp, and came in to see the man that he thought had been killed, and as Sancho caught sight of him at the door, seeing him coming in his shirt, with a cloth on his head, and a lamp in his hand, and a very forbidding countenance, he said to his master, "Senor, can it be that this is the enchanted Moor coming back to give us more castigation if there be anything still left in the ink bottle?" "It cannot be the Moor," answered Don Quixote, "for those under enchantment do not let themselves be seen by anyone." If they don't let themselves be seen, they let themselves be felt, said Sancho. If not, let my shoulders speak to the point. Mine could speak too, said Don Quixote, but that is not a sufficient reason for believing that what we see is the enchanted Moor. The officer came up, and finding them engaged in such a peaceful conversation, stood amazed, though Don Quixote, to be sure, still lay on his back, unable to move from pure pummeling and plasters. The officer turned to him and said, "Well, how goes it, good man?" "I would speak more politely if I were you," replied Don Quixote. "Is it the way of this country to address knights errant in that style, you boogie?" The cuadrillero, finding himself so disrespectfully treated by such a sour-looking individual, lost his temper, and raising the lamp full of oil, smote Don Quixote such a blow with it on the head that he gave him a badly broken pate. Then, all being in darkness, he went out, and Sancho Panza said, "That is certainly the enchanted Moor, senor, and he keeps the treasure for others and for us only the cuffs and lamp wax." "That is the truth," answered Don Quixote, "and there is no use in troubling oneself about these matters of enchantment or being angry or vexed at them, for as they are invisible and visionary we shall find no one on whom to avenge ourselves. Do what we may, rise, Sancho, if you can, and call the alcalde of this fortress, and get him to give me a little oil, wine, salt, and rosemary to make the salutiferous balsam, for truly I believe I have great need of it now, because I am losing much blood from the wound that phantom gave me." Sancho got up with pain enough in his bones, and went after the innkeeper in the dark, and meeting the officer, who was looking to see what had become of his enemy, he said to him, "Senor, whoever you are, do us the favor and kindness to give us a little rosemary, oil, salt, and wine, for it is wanted to cure one of the best knights errant on earth, who lies on over their bed wounded by the hands of the enchanted Moor that is in this inn." When the officer heard him talk in this way, he took him for a man out of his senses, and as day was now beginning to break, he opened the inn gate, and calling the host, he told him what this good man wanted. The host furnished him with what he required, and Sancho brought it to Don Quixote, who, with his hand to his head, was bewailing the pain of the blow of the lamp, which had done him no more harm than raising a couple of rather large lumps, and what he fancied blood was only the sweat that flowed from him in his sufferings during the late storm. To be brief, he took the materials of which he made a compound, mixing them all and boiling them a good while until it seemed to him they had come to perfection. He then asked for some vial to pour it into, and as there was not one in the inn, he decided on putting it into a tin oil bottle or flask, of which the host made him a free gift, and over the flask he repeated more than 80 paternosters and as many more Ave Marias, salves, and credos, accompanying each word with a cross by way of benediction, at all which there were present Sancho, the innkeeper, and the cuadrillero, for the carrier was now peacefully engaged in attending to the comfort of his mules. This being accomplished, he felt anxious to make trial himself, on the spot, of the virtue of this precious balsam, as he considered it, and so he drank near a quart of what could not be put into the flask, and remained in the pigskin in which it had been boiled. But scarcely had he done drinking when he began to vomit in such a way that nothing was left in his stomach, and with the pangs and spasms of vomiting he broke into a profuse sweat, on account of which he bade them cover him up and leave him alone. They did so, and he lay sleeping more than 3 hours, at the end of which he awoke and felt very great bodily relief and so much ease from his bruises that he thought himself quite cured, and truly believed he had hit upon the balsam of Fierabras, and that with this remedy he may thenceforward, without any fear, face any kind of destruction, battle, or combat, however perilous it may be. Sancho Panza, who also regarded the amendment of his master as miraculous, begged him to give him what was left in the pigskin, which was no small quantity. Don Quixote consented, and he taking it with both hands in good faith and with a better will, gulped down and drained off, very little less than his master. But the fact is that the stomach of poor Sancho was of necessity not so delicate as that of his master, and so, before vomiting, he was seized with such gripings and retchings, and such sweats and faintness, that truly and truly be believed his last hour had come, and finding himself so racked and tormented he cursed the balsam and the thief that had given it to him. Don Quixote, seeing him in this state, said, "It is my belief, Sancho, that this mischief comes of your not being dubbed a knight, for I am persuaded this liquor cannot be good for those who are not so." "If your worship knew that," returned Sancho, "woe betide me and all my kindred. Why did you let me taste it?" At this moment the draught took effect, and the poor squire began to discharge both ways at such a rate that the rush mat on which he had thrown himself and the canvas blanket he had covering him were fit for nothing afterwards. He sweated and perspired with such paroxysms and convulsions that not only he himself but all present thought his end had come. This tempest and tribulation lasted about 2 hours, at the end of which he was left, not like his master, but so weak and exhausted that he could not stand. Don Quixote, however, who, as has been said, felt himself relieved and well, was eager to take his departure at once in quest of adventures, as it seemed to him that all the time he loitered there was a fraud upon the world and those in it who stood in need of his help and protection, all the more when he had the security and confidence his balsam afforded him. And so, urged by this impulse, he saddled Rocinante himself and put the pack saddle on his squire's beast, whom likewise he helped to dress and mount the ass, after which he mounted his horse, and turning to a corner of the inn he laid hold of a pike that stood there to serve him by way of a lance. All that were in the inn, who were more than 20 persons, stood watching him. The innkeeper's daughter was likewise observing him, and he too never took his eyes off her, and from time to time fetched a sigh that he seemed to pluck up from the depths of his bowels, but they all thought it must be from the pain he felt in his ribs. At any rate, they who had seen him plastered the night before thought so. As soon as they were both mounted at the gate of the inn, he called to the host and said in a very grave and measured voice, "Many and great are the favors, Senor Alcaide, that I have received in this castle of yours, and I remain under the deepest obligation to be grateful to you for them all the days of my life. If I can repay them in avenging you of any arrogant foe who may have wronged you, know that my calling is no other than to aid the weak, to avenge those who suffer wrong, and to chastise perfidy. Search your memory, and if you find anything of this kind you need only tell me of it, and I promise you by the order of knighthood, which I have received, to procure you satisfaction and reparation to the utmost of your desire." The innkeeper replied to him with equal calmness, "Sir Knight, I do not want your worship to avenge me of any wrong, because when any is done me, I can take what vengeance seems good to me. The only thing I want is that you pay me the score that you have run up in the inn last night, as well for the straw and barley for your 2 beasts as for supper and beds." "Then this is an inn," said Don Quixote. "And a very respectable one," said the innkeeper. "I have been under a mistake all this time," answered Don Quixote, "for, in truth, I thought it was a castle, and not a bad one. But since it appears that it is not a castle but an inn, all that can be done now is that you should excuse the payment, for I cannot contravene the rule of knights errant, of whom I know as a fact, and up to the present I have read nothing to the contrary, that they never paid for lodging or anything else in the inn where they may be, for any hospitality that may be offered them is their due by law and right in return for the insufferable toil they endure in seeking adventures by night and by day, in summer and in winter, on foot and on horseback, in hunger and thirst, cold and heat, exposed to all the inclemencies of heaven and all the hardships of earth." "I have little to do with that," replied the innkeeper. "Pay me what you owe me, and let us have no more talk of chivalry, for all I care about is to get my money." "You are a stupid, scurvy innkeeper," said Don Quixote, and putting spurs to Rocinante and bringing his pike to the slope, he rode out of the inn before anyone could stop him, and pushed on some distance without looking to see if his squire was following him. The innkeeper, when he saw him go without paying him, ran to get payment of Sancho, who said that as his master would not pay, neither would he, because, being as he was squire to a knight errant, the same rule and reason held good for him as for his master with regard to not paying anything in inns and hostelries. At this the innkeeper waxed very wroth, and threatened, if he did not pay, to compel him in a way that he would not like, to which Sancho made answer that by the law of chivalry his master had received he would not pay a rap, though it cost him his life, for the excellent and ancient usage of knights errant was not going to be violated by him, nor should the squires of such as were yet to come into the world ever complain of him or reproach him with breaking so just a privilege. The ill luck of the unfortunate Sancho so ordered it that among the company in the inn there were 4 woolcarders from Segovia, 3 needlemakers from the colt of Cordova, and 2 lodgers from the fair of Seville, lively fellows, tender-hearted, fond of a joke, and playful, who, almost as if instigated and moved by a common impulse, made up to Sancho and dismounted him from his ass, while one of them went in for the blanket of the host's bed. But on flinging him into it they looked up, and seeing that the ceiling was somewhat lower what they required for their work, they decided upon going out into the yard, which was bounded by the sky, and there, putting Sancho in the middle of the blanket, they began to raise him high, making sport with him as they would with a dog at shrovetide. The cries of the poor blanketed wretch were so loud that they reached the ears of his master, who, halting to listen attentively, was persuaded that some new adventure was coming, until he clearly perceived that it was his squire who uttered them. Wheeling about he came up to the inn with a laborious gallop, and finding it shut went round it to see if he could find some way of getting in. But as soon as he came to the wall of the yard, which was not very high, he discovered the game that was being played with his squire. He saw him rising and falling in the air with such grace and nimbleness that, had his rage allowed him, it is my belief, he would have laughed. He tried to climb from his horse on to the top of the wall, but he was so bruised and battered that he could not even dismount, and so from the back of his horse he began to utter such maledictions and objurgations against those who were blanketing Sancho as it would be impossible to write down accurately. They, however, did not stay their laughter or their work for this, nor did the flying Sancho cease his lamentations, mingled now with threats, now with entreaties, but all to little purpose, or none at all, until from pure weariness they left off. They then brought him his ass, and mounting him on top of it, they put his jacket round him, and the compassionate Maritornes, seeing him so exhausted, thought fit to refresh him with a jug of water, and, that it may be all the cooler, she fetched it from the well. Sancho took it, and as he was raising it to his mouth he was stopped by the cries of his master, exclaiming, "Sancho, my son, drink not water, drink it not, my son, for it will kill you. See, here I have the blessed balsam," and he held up the flask of liquor, "and with drinking 2 drops of it you will certainly be restored." At these words Sancho turned his eyes asquint, and in a still louder voice said, "Can it be your worship has forgotten that I am not a knight? Or do you want me to end by vomiting up what bowels I have left after last night? Keep your liquor in the name of all the devils, and leave me to myself." And at one and the same instant he left off talking and began drinking. But as at the first sup he perceived it was water, he did not care to go on with it, and begged Maritornes to fetch him some wine, which she did with right good will, and paid for it with her own money. For truly they say of her that, though she was in that line of life, there was some faint and distant resemblance to a Christian about her. When Sancho had done drinking he dug his heels into his ass, and the gate of the inn being thrown open, he passed out very well pleased at having paid nothing and carried his point, though it had been at the expense of his usual sureties, his shoulders. It is true that the innkeeper detained his alforjas in payment of what was owing to him, but Sancho took his departure in such a flurry that he never missed them. Chapter 18, in which is related the discourse Sancho Panza held with his master, Don Quixote, and other adventures worth relating. Sancho reached his master so limp and faint that he could not urge on his beast. When Don Quixote saw the state he was in, he said, I have now come to the conclusion, good Sancho, that this castle or inn is beyond a doubt enchanted, because those who have so atrociously diverted themselves with you, what can they be but phantoms or beings of another world? And I hold this confirmed by having noticed that when I was by the wall of the yard witnessing the acts of your sad tragedy, it was out of my power to mount upon it, nor could I evening dismount from Rocinante, because they know doubt had me enchanted. For I swear to you by the faith of what I am, that if I had been able to climb up or dismount, I would have avenged you in such a way that those braggart thieves would have remembered their freak forever, evening though in so doing I knew that I contravened the laws of chivalry, which, as I have often told you, do not permit a knight to lay hands on him who is not one, save in case of urgent and great necessity in defense of his own life and person. I would have avenged myself too if I could, said Sancho, whether I had been dubbed knight or not, but I could not, though for my part I am persuaded those who amused themselves with me were not phantoms or enchanted men, as your worship says, but men of flesh and bone like ourselves, and they all had their names, for I heard them name them when they were tossing me, and one was called Pedro Martinez, and another Tenorio Hernandez, and the innkeeper, I heard, was called Juan Palonc, the left-handed, so that, senor, your not being able to leap over the wall of the yard or dismount from your horse came of something else besides enchantments, and what I make out clearly from all this is that these adventures we go seeking will in the end lead us into such misadventures that we shall not know which is our right foot, and that the best and wisest thing, according to my small wits, would be for us to return home, now that it is harvest time, and attend to our business, and give over wandering from Zecca to Mecca and from pail to bucket, as the saying is. How little you knowest about chivalry, Sancho, replied Don Quixote. Hold your peace and have patience. The day will come when you shall see, with yours own eyes, what an honorable thing it is to wander in the pursuit of this calling. No, tell me, what greater pleasure can there be in the world, or what delight can equal that of winning a battle and triumphing over one's enemy? None, beyond all doubt. Very likely, answered Sancho, though I do not know it. All I know is that since we have been knights errant, or since your worship has been one, for I have no right to reckon myself one of so honorable a number, we have never won any battle except the one with the Biscayan, an evening. Out of that your worship came with half an ear and half a helmet the less, and from that till now it has been all cudgellings and more cudgellings, cuffs and more cuffs, I getting the blanketing over and above, and falling in with enchanted persons on whom I cannot avenge myself, so as to know what the delight, as your worship calls it, of conquering an enemy is like. That is what vexes me, and what ought to vex you, Sancho, replied Don Quixote. But henceforward I will endeavor to have at hand some sword, made by such craft that no kind of enchantments can take effect upon him who carries it, and it is evening possible that fortune may procure for me that which belonged to Amadis when he was called the Knight of the Burning Sword, which was one of the best swords that ever knight in the world possessed, for, besides having the said virtue, it cut like a razor, and there was no armor, however strong and enchanted it may be, that could resist it. Such is my luck, said Sancho. That evening, if that happened and your worship found some such sword, it would, like the balsam, turn out serviceable and good for dubbed knights only, and as for the squires, they may sup sorrow. Fear not that, Sancho, said Don Quixote, heaven will deal better by you. Thus talking, Don Quixote and his squire were going along, when, on the road they were following, Don Quixote perceived approaching them a large and thick cloud of dust, on seeing which he turned to Sancho and said, "This is the day, Sancho, on which will be seen the boon my fortune is reserving for me. This, I say, is the day on which as much as on any other shall be displayed the may of my arm, and on which I shall do deeds that shall remain written in the book of fame for all ages to come. Seest you that cloud of dust which rises over there? Well, then, all that is churned up by a vast army composed of various and countless nations that comes marching there. According to that there must be two, said Sancho, for on this opposite side also there rises just such another cloud of dust. Don Quixote turned to look and found that it was true, and rejoicing exceedingly, he concluded that there were two armies about to engage an encounter in the amid of that broad plain, for at all times and seasons his fancy was full of the battles, enchantments, adventures, crazy feats, loves, and defiances that are recorded in the books of chivalry, and everything he said, thought, or did had reference to such things. Now the cloud of dust he had seen was raised by two great droves of sheep coming along the same road in opposite directions, which, because of the dust, did not become visible until they drew near. But Don Quixote asserted so positively that they were armies that Sancho was led to believe it and say, "Well, and what are we to do, senor?" "What?" said Don Quixote. "Give aid and assistance to the weak and those who need it. And you must know, Sancho, that this which comes opposite to us is conducted and led by the mighty Emperor Alifanfarin, lord of the great isle of Trapabana. This other that marches behind me is that of his enemy, the king of the Garamantas, Pentapolin of the bare arm, for he always goes into battle with his right arm bare." "But why are these two lords such enemies?" "They are at enmity," replied Don Quixote, "because this Alifanfarin is a furious pagan and is in love with the daughter of Pentapolin, who is a very beautiful and moreover gracious lady and a Christian, and her father is unwilling to bestow her upon the pagan king unless he first abandons the religion of his false prophet Mahomet and adopts his own." "By my beard," said Sancho, "but Pentapolin does quite right, and I will help him as much as I can." "In that you will do what is your duty, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for to engage in battles of this sort it is not requisite to be a dubbed knight." "That I can well understand," answered Sancho, "but where shall we put this ass where we may be sure to find him after the fray is over? For I believe it has not been the custom so far to go into battle on a beast of this kind." "That is true," said Don Quixote, "and what you had best do with him is to leave him to take his chance whether he be lost or not, for the horses we shall have when we come out victors will be so many that evening Rocinante will run a risk of being changed for another. But attend to me, and observe, for I wish to give you some account of the chief knights who accompany these two armies, and that you mayest the better see and mark. Let us withdraw to that hillock which rises over there, from where both armies may be seen." They did so, and placed themselves on a rising ground from which the two droves that Don Quixote made armies of may have been plainly seen if the clouds of dust they raised had not obscured them and blinded the sight. Nevertheless, seeing in his imagination what he did not see and what did not exist, he began thus in a loud voice: "That knight whom you seest over there in yellow armor, who bears upon his shield a lion crowned crouching at the feet of a damsel, is the valiant Loacalco, lord of the Silver Bridge. That one in armor with flowers of gold, who bears on his shield 3 crowns argent on an azure field, is the dreaded Micacolmo, Grand Duke of Quirosha. that other of gigantic frame. On his right hand is the ever dauntless Branda Barbaranda, Balach, lord of the three Arabias, who for armor wears that serpent skin, and has for shield a gate which, according to tradition, is one of those of the temple that Samson brought to the ground when by his death he revenged himself upon his enemies. But turn yours eyes to the other side, and you shall see in front and in the van of this other army the ever victorious and never vanquished Timonel of Carcagona, prince of New Biscay, who comes in armor with arms quartered azure, vert, white, and yellow, and bears on his shield a cat or on a field tawny with a motto, which says Mayu, which is the beginning of the name of his lady, who, according to report, is the peerless Myelina, daughter of the Duke Elphenequin of the Algarve, the other, who burdens and presses the loins of that powerful charger and bears arms white as snow and a shield blank, and without any device, is a novice knight, a Frenchman by birth, Pierres, Happen by name, lord of the baronies of Utrecht, that other, who with iron-shod heels strikes the flanks of that nimble party-colored zebra, and for arms bears azure vare, is the mighty Duke of Nerbia, Espartafilardo del Bosque, who bears for device on his shield an asparagus plant with a motto in Castilian that says Restria mi suerte. And so he went on naming a number of knights of one squadron or the other, out of his imagination, until all he assigned offhand their arms, colors, devices, and mottos, carried away by the illusions of his unheard of craze, and without a pause he continued, people of divers nations compose this squadron in front. Here are those that drink of the sweet waters of the famous Xanthus, those that scour the woody Massilian plains, those that sift the pure fine gold of Arabia Felix, those that enjoy the famed cool banks of the crystal Thermodon, those that in many and various ways divert the streams of the golden Pactolus, the Numidians faithless in their promises, the Persians renowned in archery, the Parthians and the Medes that fight as they fly, the Arabs that ever shift their dwellings, the Scythians as cruel as they are fair, the Ethiopians with pierced lips, and an infinity of other nations whose features I recognize and descry, though I cannot recall their names. In this other squadron there come those that drink of the crystal streams of the olive-bearing biddies, those that make smooth their countenances with the water of the ever-rich and golden Tagus, those that rejoice in the fertilizing flow of the divine Genil, those that roam the Tartesian plains abounding in pasture, those that take their pleasure in the Elysian meadows of Jerez, the rich Manchegans crowned with ruddy ears of corn, the wares of iron, old relics of the Gothic race, those that bathe in the Pisuerga renowned for its gentle current, those that feed their herds along the spreading pastures of the winding Guadiana famed for its hidden course, those that tremble with the cold of the pine-clad Pyrenees or the dazzling snows of the lofty Apennine. In a word, as many as all Europe includes and contains. Good God, what a number of countries and nations he named, giving to each its proper attributes with marvelous readiness, brimful and saturated with what he had read in his lying books. Sancho Panza hung upon his words without speaking, and from time to time turned to try if he could see the knights and giants his master was describing, and as he could not make out one of them he said to him, Senor, devil take it if there's a sign of any man you talk of, knight or giant, in the whole thing. Maybe it's all enchantment, like the phantoms. Last night, how can you say that? Answered Don Quixote. Do you not hear the neighing of the steeds, the braying of the trumpets, the roll of the drums? I hear nothing but a great bleating of ewes and sheep, said Sancho, which was true, for by this time the two flocks had come close. The fear you are in, Sancho, said Don Quixote, prevents you from seeing or hearing correctly, for one of the effects of fear is to derange the senses and make things appear different from what they are. If you are in such fear, withdraw to one side and leave me to myself, for alone I suffice to bring victory to that side to which I shall give my aid. And so saying he gave Rocinante the spur, and putting the lance in rest, shot down the slope like a thunderbolt. Sancho shouted after him, crying, Come back, Senor Don Quixote, I vow to God they are sheep and use you, are charging. Come back, unlucky the father that begot me. What madness is this? Look, there is no giant, nor knight, nor cats, nor arms, nor shields quartered or whole, nor ver azure or bedeviled. What are you about, sinner, that I am before God? But not for all these entreaties did Don Quixote turn back. On the contrary, he went on shouting out, Ho, knights, ye who follow and fight under the banners of the valiant emperor Pentapolin of the bare arm, follow me all, ye shall see how easily I shall give him his revenge over his enemy Alifanfaron of the Trapobana. So saying, he dashed into the amid of the squadron of youths and began spearing them with as much spirit and intrepidity as if he were transfixing mortal enemies in earnest. The shepherds and drovers, accompanying the flock, shouted to him to desist. Seeing it was no use, they ungirt their slings and began to salute his ears with stones as big as one's fist. Don Quixote gave no heed to the stones, but, letting drive, right and left kept saying, Where are you, proud Alifanfaron? Come before me. I am a single knight, who would fain prove your prowess hand to hand, and make you yield your life a penalty for the wrong you do to the valiant Pentapolin. Theramanta. Here came a sugar plum from the brook that struck him on the side and buried a couple of ribs in his body. Feeling himself so smitten, he imagined himself slain or badly wounded for certain, and recollecting his liquor, he drew out his flask, and putting it to his mouth began to pour the contents into his stomach. But before he had succeeded in swallowing what seemed to him enough, there came another almond which struck him on the hand and on the flask so fairly that it smashed it to pieces, knocking 3 or 4 tests and grinders out of his mouth in its course, and sorely crushing 2 fingers of his hand. Such was the force of the first blow and of the second, that the poor knight, in spite of himself, came down backwards off his horse. The shepherds came up, and felt sure they had killed him. So in all haste they collected their flock together, took up the dead beasts, of which there were more than 7, and made off without waiting to ascertain anything further. All this time Sancho stood on the hill watching the crazy feats his master was performing, and tearing his beard and cursing the hour and the occasion when fortune had made him acquainted with him. Seeing him then brought to the ground, and that the shepherds had taken themselves off, he ran to him and found him in very bad case, though not unconscious. And, said he, Did I not tell you to come back, Senor Don Quixote, and that what you were going to attack were not armies but droves of sheep? That's how that thief of a sage, my enemy, can alter and falsify things, answered Don Quixote. You must know, Sancho, that it is a very easy matter for those of his sort to make us believe what they choose. And this malignant being who persecutes me, envious of the glory he knew I was to win in this battle, has turned the squadrons of the enemy into droves of sheep. At any rate, do this much, I beg of you, Sancho, to undeceive thyself, and see that what I say is true. Mount your ass and follow them quietly, and you shall see that when they have gone some little distance from this they will return to their original shape, and, ceasing to be sheep, become men in all respects as I described them to you at first. But go not just yet, for I want your help and assistance. Come here, and see how many of my tests and grinders are missing, for I feel as if there was not one left in my mouth. Sancho came so close that he almost put his eyes into his mouth. Now just at that moment the balsam had acted on the stomach of Don Quixote, so, at the very instant when Sancho came to examine his mouth, he discharged all its contents with more force than a musket, and full into the beard of the compassionate squire. Holy Mary, cried Sancho, what is this that has happened me? Clearly, this sinner is mortally wounded, as he vomits blood from the mouth, but, considering the matter a little more closely, he perceived by the color, taste, and smell that it was not blood but the balsam from the flask, which he had seen him drink, and he was taken with such a loathing that his stomach turned, and he vomited up his inside over his very master. and both were left in a precious state. Sancho ran to his ass to get something with which to clean himself and relieve his master out of his alforjas, but not finding them, he well near took leave of his senses, and cursed himself anew, and in his heart resolved to quit his master and return home, evening though he forfeited the wages of his service and all hopes of the promised island. Don Quixote now rose, and putting his left hand to his mouth to keep his tests from falling out altogether, with the other he laid hold of the bridle of Rocinante, who had never stirred from his master's side, so loyal and well-behaved was he, and betook himself to where the squire stood leaning over his ass with his hand to his cheek, like one in deep dejection. Seeing him in this mood, looking so sad, Don Quixote said to him, "Bear in mind, Sancho, that one man is no more than another unless he does more than another. All these tempests that fall upon us are signs that fair weather is coming shortly, and that things will go well with us, for it is impossible for good or evil to last forever, and therefore it follows that the evil having lasted long, the good must be now near at hand. So you must not distress thyself at the misfortunes which happen to me, since you have no share in them." "How have I not?" replied Sancho. "Was he whom they blanketed yesterday perhaps any other than my father's son? And the alforjas that are missing today with all my treasures, did they belong to any other but myself?" "What, are the alforjas missing, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "Yes, they are missing," answered Sancho. "In that case we have nothing to eat today," replied Don Quixote. "It would be so," answered Sancho, "if there were none of the herbs your worship says you know in these meadows, those with which knights errant, as unlucky as your worship, are wont to supply such like shortcomings." "For all that," answered Don Quixote, "I would rather have just now a quarter of bread or a loaf and a couple of pilchards' heads than all the herbs described by Dioscorides, evening with Dr. Laguna's notes. Nevertheless, Sancho the Good, mount your beast and come along with me, for God, who provides for all things, will not fail us more especially when we are so active in his service as we are, since he fails not the midges of the air, nor the grubs of the earth, nor the tadpoles of the water, and is so merciful that he makes his sun to rise on the good and on the evil, and sends rain on the unjust and on the just." "Your worship would make a better preacher than knight-errant," said Sancho. "Knights-errant knew and ought to know everything, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for there were knights-errant in former times as well qualified to deliver a sermon or discourse in the middle of an encampment as if they had graduated in the University of Paris, by which we may see that the lance has never blunted the pen, nor the pen the lance." "Well, be it as your worship says," replied Sancho. "Let us be off now, and find some place of shelter for the night, and God grant it may be somewhere where there are no blankets, nor blanketeers, nor phantoms, nor enchanted Moors, for if there are, may the devil take the whole concern." "Ask that of God, my son," said Don Quixote, "and do you lead on where you will, for this time I leave our lodging to your choice. But reach me here your hand, and feel with your finger, and find out how many of my tests and grinders are missing from this right side of the upper jaw, for it is there I feel the pain." Sancho put in his fingers, and feeling about asked him how many grinders used your worship have on this side. "Four," replied Don Quixote, "besides the back tooth, all whole and quite sound." "Mind what you are saying, senor. I say 4, if not 5, answered Don Quixote, "for never in my life have I had tooth or grinder drawn, nor has any fallen out or been destroyed by any decay or rheum." "Well, then," said Sancho, "in this lower side your worship has no more than 2 grinders and a half, and in the upper neither a half nor any at all, for it is all as smooth as the palm of my hand." "Luckless that I am," said Don Quixote, hearing the sad news his squire gave him. "I had rather they despoiled me of an arm, so it were not the sword arm, for I tell you, Sancho, a mouth without teeth is like a mill without a millstone, and a tooth is much more to be prized than a diamond. But we who profess the austere order of chivalry are liable to all this. Mount, friend, and lead the way, and I will follow you at whatever pace you will. Sancho did as he bade him, and proceeded in the direction in which he thought he may find refuge without quitting the high road, which was there very much frequented. Chapter 19 of the shrewd discourse which Sancho held with his master, and of the adventure that befell him with a dead body, together with other notable occurrences. It seems to me, Senor, that all these mishaps that have befallen us of late have been without any doubt a punishment for the offense committed by your worship against the order of chivalry in not keeping the oath you made not to eat bread off a tablecloth or embrace the queen, and all the rest of it that your worship swore to observe until you had taken that helmet of Malandrinos, or whatever the Moor is called, for I do not very well remember. You are very right, Sancho, said Don Quixote, but to tell the truth, it had escaped my memory, and likewise you mayest rely upon it that the affair of the blanket happened to you because of your fault in not reminding me of it in time. But I will make amends, for there are ways of compounding for everything in the order of chivalry. Why, have I taken an oath of some sort, then? Said Sancho. It makes no matter that you have not taken an oath, said Don Quixote. Suffice it that I see you are not quite clear of complicity, and whether or no, it will not be ill done to provide ourselves with a remedy. In that case, said Sancho, mind that your worship does not forget this, as you did the oath. Perhaps the phantoms may take it into their heads to amuse themselves once more with me, or evening with your worship if they see you so obstinate. While engaged in this and other talk, night overtook them on the road, before they had reached or discovered any place of shelter. And what made it still worse was that they were dying of hunger, for with the loss of the alforges they had lost their entire larder and commissariat, and to complete the misfortune they met with an adventure which without any invention had really the appearance of one. It so happened that the night closed in somewhat darkly, but for all that they pushed on, Sancho, feeling sure that as the road was the king's highway they may reasonably expect to find some inn within a league or two. Going along, then, in this way, the night dark, the squire hungry, the master sharp set, they saw coming towards them on the road they were traveling a great number of lights which looked exactly like stars in motion. Sancho was taken aback at the sight of them, nor did Don Quixote altogether relish them. The one pulled up his ass by the halter, the other his hack by the bridle, and they stood still, watching anxiously to see what all this would turn out to be, and found that the lights were approaching them, and the nearer they came the greater they seemed, at which spectacle Sancho began to shake like a man dosed with mercury, and Don Quixote's hair stood on end. He, however, plucking up spirit a little, said, "This, no doubt, Sancho, will be a most mighty and perilous adventure, in which it will be needful for me to put forth all my valor and resolution." "Unlucky me," answered Sancho, "if this adventure happens to be one of phantoms, as I am beginning to think it is. Where shall I find the ribs to bear it? Be they phantoms ever so much," said Don Quixote, "I will not permit them to touch a thread of your garments, for if they played tricks with you the time before, it was because I was unable to leap the walls of the yard. But now we are on a wide plain, where I shall be able to wield my sword as I please, and if they enchant and cripple you as they did the last time," said Sancho, "what difference will it make being on the open plain or not?" "For all that," replied Don Quixote, "I entreat you, Sancho, to keep a good heart, for experience will tell you what mine is." "I will, please God," answered Sancho, and the two retiring to one side of the road set themselves to observe closely what all these moving lights may be, and very soon afterwards they made out some 20 encamisados, all on horseback, with lighted torches in their hands, the awe-inspiring aspect of whom completely extinguished the courage of Sancho, who began to chatter with his test like one in the cold fit of an ague, and his heart sank and his tests chattered still more when they perceived distinctly that behind them there came a litter covered over with black and followed by 6 more mounted figures in mourning down to the very feet of their mules, for they could perceive plainly they were not horses by the easy pace at which they went, and as the encamisados came along they muttered to themselves in a low plaintive tone, "This strange spectacle at such an hour and in such a solitary place was quite enough to strike terror into Sancho's heart, and evening into his master's." And save in Don Quixote's case did so, for all Sancho's resolution had now broken down. It was just the opposite with his master, whose imagination immediately conjured up all this to him vividly as one of the adventures of his books. He took it into his head that the litter was a bier on which was borne some sorely wounded or slain knight, to avenge whom was a task reserved for him alone, and without any further reasoning he laid his lance in rest, fixed himself firmly in his saddle, and with gallant spirit and bearing took up his position in the middle of the road where the encamisados must of necessity pass, and as soon as he saw them near at hand he raised his voice and said, "Halt, knights, or whoever ye may be, and render me account of who ye are, from where ye come, where ye go, what it is ye carry upon that bier, for, to judge by appearances, either ye have done some wrong or some wrong has been done to you, and it is fitting and necessary that I should know, either that I may chastise you for the evil ye have done, or else that I may avenge you for the injury that has been inflicted upon you." "We are in haste," answered one of the encamisados, "and the inn is far off, and we cannot stop to render you such an account as you demand." And spurring his mule he moved on. Don Quixote was mightily provoked by this answer, and seizing the mule by the bridle he said, "Halt, and be more mannerly, and render an account of what I have asked of you, else take my defiance to combat all of you." The mule was shy, and was so frightened at her bridle being seized, that rearing up she flung her rider to the ground over her haunches. An attendant who was on foot, seeing the encamisado fall, began to abuse Don Quixote, who now moved to anger. Without any more ado, laying his lance in rest, charged one of the men in mourning and brought him badly wounded to the ground, and as he wheeled round upon the others the agility with which he attacked and routed them was a sight to see, for it seemed just as if wings had that instant grown upon Rocinante, so lightly and proudly did he bear himself. The encamisados were all timid folk and unarmed, so they speedily made their escape from the fray and set off at a run across the plain with their lighted torches, looking exactly like maskers running on some gala or festival night. The mourners, too, enveloped and swathed in their skirts and gowns, were unable to bestir themselves, and so with entire safety to himself Don Quixote belabored them all and drove them off against their will, for they all thought it was no man but a devil from hell come to carry away the dead body they had in the litter. Sancho beheld all this in astonishment at the intrepidity of his lord, and said to himself, "Clearly this master of mine is as bold and valiant as he says he is." A burning torch lay on the ground near the first man whom the mule had thrown, by the light of which Don Quixote perceived him, and coming up to him he presented the point of the lance to his face, calling on him to yield himself prisoner, or else he would kill him, to which the prostrate man replied, "I am prisoner enough as it is, I cannot stir, for one of my legs is broken. I entreat you, if you be a Christian gentleman, not to kill me, which will be committing grave sacrilege, for I am a licentiate, and I hold first orders." "Then what the devil brought you here, being a churchman?" said Don Quixote. "What, senor?" said the other. "My bad luck." "Then still worse awaits you," said Don Quixote, "if you do not satisfy me as to all I asked you at first. You shall be soon satisfied, said the licentiate. You must know, then, that though just now I said I was a licentiate, I'm only a bachelor, and my name is Alonzo Lopez. I am a native of Alcobendas. I come from the city of Pisa with 11 others, priests, the same who fled with the torches, and we are going to the city of Segovia accompanying a dead body, which is in that litter, and is that of a gentleman who died in Pisa, where he was interred, and now, as I said, we are taking his bones to their burial place, which is in Segovia, where he was born. And who killed him? Asked Don Quixote. God, by means of a malignant fever that took him, answered the bachelor. In that case, said Don Quixote, the Lord has relieved me of the task of avenging his death had any other slain him, but he who slew him, having slain him, there is nothing for it but to be silent and shrug one's shoulders. I should do the same were he to slay myself, and I would have your reverence know that I am a knight of La Mancha, Don Quixote by name, and it is my business and calling to roam the world righting wrongs and redressing injuries. I do not know how that about righting wrongs can be, said the bachelor, for from straight you have made me crooked, leaving me with a broken leg that will never seat itself straight again all the days of its life, and the injury you have redressed in my case has been to leave me injured in such a way that I shall remain injured forever, and the height of misadventure it was to fall in with you who go in search of adventures. Things do not all happen in the same way, answered Don Quixote. It all came, Sir Bachelor Alonzo Lopez, of your going, as you did, by night, dressed in those surplices, with lighted torches, praying, covered with mourning, so that naturally you looked like something evil and of the other world, and so I could not avoid doing my duty in attacking you, and I should have attacked you evening had I known positively that you were the very devils of hell, for such I certainly believed and took you to be, as my fate has so willed it, said the bachelor. I entreat you, sir, knight errant, whose errand has been such an evil one for me, to help me to get from under this mule that holds one of my legs caught between the stirrup and the saddle. I would have talked until to tomorrow, said Don Quixote. How long were you going to wait before telling me of your distress? He at once called to Sancho, who, however, had no mind to come, as he was just then engaged in unloading a sumpter mule well laden with provender, which these worthy gentlemen had brought with them. Sancho made a bag of his coat, and getting together as much as he could, and as the bag would hold, he loaded his beast, and then hastened to obey his master's call, and help him to remove the bachelor from under the mule. Then putting him on her back he gave him the torch, and Don Quixote bade him follow the track of his companions, and beg pardon of them on his part for the wrong which he could not help doing them. And said Sancho, if by chance these gentlemen should want to know who was the hero that served them so, your worship may tell them that he is the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha, otherwise called the Knight of the Rueful Countenance. The bachelor then took his departure. I forgot to mention that before he did so he said to Don Quixote, remember that you stand excommunicated for having laid violent hands on a holy thing, juxta lud, sequis, suadent diabolo. I do not understand that Latin, answered Don Quixote, but I know well, I did not lay hands, only this pike. Besides, I did not think I was committing an assault upon priests or things of the church, which, like a Catholic and faithful Christian as I am, I respect and revere, but upon phantoms and spectres of the other world. But evening so, I remember how it fared with Cid Dias when he broke the chair of the ambassador of that king before his holiness the Pope, who excommunicated him for the same. And yet the good Roderick of Vivar bore himself that day like a very noble and valiant knight. On hearing this the bachelor took his departure, as has been said, without making any reply, and Don Quixote asked Sancho what had induced him to call him the Knight of the Rueful Countenance more than at any other time. I will tell you, answered Sancho, it was because I have been looking at you for some time by the light of the torch held by that unfortunate and truly your worship has got of late the most ill-favored countenance I ever saw. It must be either owing to the fatigue of this combat, or else to the want of tests and grinders. It is not that, replied Don Quixote, but because the sage whose duty it will be to write the history of my achievements must have thought it proper that I should take some distinctive name as all knights of yore did, one being he of the burning sword, another he of the unicorn, this one he of the damsels, that he of the phoenix, another the knight of the griffin, and another he of the death, and by these names and designations they were known all the world round, and so I say that the sage aforesaid must have put it into your mouth and mind just now to call me the Knight of the Rueful Countenance, as I intend to call myself from this day forward, and that the said name may fit me better, I mean, when the opportunity offers, to have a very rueful countenance painted on my shield. There is no occasion, Senor, for wasting time or money on making that countenance, said Sancho, for all that need be done is for your worship to show your own face to face to those who look at you, and without anything more, either image or shield, they will call you him of the rueful countenance, and believe me, I am telling you the truth. For I assure you, Senor, and in good part be it said, hunger and the loss of your grinders have given you such an ill-favored face that, as I say, the rueful picture may be very well spared. Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's pleasantry, nevertheless he resolved to call himself by that name, and have his shield or buckler painted as he had devised. Don Quixote would have looked to see whether the body in the litter were bones or not, but Sancho would not of it, saying, Senor, you have ended this perilous adventure more safely for yourself than any of those I have seen. Perhaps these people, though beaten and routed, may bethink themselves that it is a single man that has beaten them, and feeling sore and ashamed of it may take heart and come in search of us and give us trouble enough. The ass is in proper trim, the mountains are near at hand, hunger presses, we have nothing more to do but make good our retreat, and as the saying is, the dead to the grave, and the living to the loaf. And driving his ass before him he begged his master to follow, who, feeling that Sancho was right, did so without replying, and after proceeding some little distance between two hills they found themselves in a wide and retired valley, where they alighted and Sancho unloaded his beast and stretched upon the green grass with hunger for sauce. They breakfasted, dined, lunched, and supped all at once, satisfying their appetites with more than one store of cold meat, which the dead man's clerical gentlemen, who seldom put themselves on short allowance, had brought with them on their sumpter mule. Chapter 20 of the unexampled and unheard of adventure which was achieved by the valiant Don Quixote of La Mancha with less peril than any ever achieved by any famous knight in the world. It cannot be, Senor, but that this grass is a proof that there must be hard by some spring or brook to give it moisture, so it would be well to move a little farther on, that we may find some place where we may quench this terrible thirst that plagues us, which beyond a doubt is more distressing than hunger. The advice seemed good to Don Quixote, and he, leading Rocinante by the bridle and Sancho the ass by the halter, after he had packed away upon him the remains of the supper, they advanced the meadow, feeling their way, for the darkness of the night made it impossible to see anything. But they had not gone 200 paces when a loud noise of water, as if falling from great rocks, struck their ears. The sound cheered them greatly, but halting to make out by listening from what quarter it came, they heard unseasonably another noise which spoiled the satisfaction the sound of the water gave them, especially for Sancho, who was by nature timid and faint-hearted. They heard, I say, strokes falling with a measured beat, and a certain rattling of iron and chains that, together with the furious din of the water, would have struck terror into any heart but Don Quixote's. The night was, as has been said, dark, and they had happened to reach a spot in among some tall trees, whose leaves, stirred by a gentle breeze, made a low ominous sound, so that What with the solitude, the place, the darkness, the noise of the water, and the rustling of the leaves, everything inspired awe and dread more, especially as they perceived that the strokes did not cease, nor the wind lull, nor morning approach, to all which may be added their ignorance as to where they were. But Don Quixote, supported by his intrepid heart, leaped on Rocinante, and bracing his buckler on his arm, brought his pike to the slope, and said, "Friend Sancho, know that I by heavens will have been born in this our iron age to revive in it the age of gold, or the golden as it is called. I am he for whom perils, mighty achievements, and valiant deeds are reserved. I am, I say again, he who is to revive the knights of the Round Table, the 12 of France, and the 9 worthies, and he who is to consign to oblivion the Platters, the Tablantes, the Olivantes and Turantes, the Phoebuses and Belenises, with the whole herd of famous knights errant of days gone by, performing in these in which I live such exploits, marvels, and feats of arms as shall obscure their brightest deeds. You do mark well, faithful and trusty squire, the gloom of this night, its strange silence, the dull confused murmur of those trees, the awful sound of that water in quest of which we came, that seems as though it were precipitating and dashing itself down from the lofty mountains of the moon, and that incessant hammering that wounds and pains our ears, which things altogether and each of itself are enough to instill fear, dread, and dismay into the breast of Mars himself, much more into one not used to hazards and adventures of the kind. Well, then, all this that I put before you is but an incentive and stimulant to my spirit, making my heart burst in my bosom through eagerness to engage in this adventure, arduous as it promises to be. Therefore tighten Rocinante's girths a little, and God be with you. Wait for me here 3 days and no more, and if in that time I come not back, you can return to our village, and from there, to do me a favor and a service, you will go to El Toboso, where you shall say to my incomparable Lady Dulcinea that her captive knight has died in attempting things that may make him worthy of being called hers." When Sancho heard his master's words, he began to weep in the most pathetic way, saying, "Senor, I know not why your worship wants to attempt this so dreadful adventure. It is night now, no one sees us here. We can easily turn about and take ourselves out of danger, evening if we don't drink for 3 days to come, and as there is no one to see us, all the less will there be anyone to set us down as cowards. Besides, I have many a time heard the curate of our village, whom your worship knows well, preach that he who seeks danger perishes in it. So it is not right to tempt God by trying so tremendous a feat from which there can be no escape save by a miracle, and heaven has performed enough of them for your worship in delivering you from being blanketed as I was, and bringing you out victorious and safe and sound from among all those enemies that were with the dead man. And if all this does not move or soften that hard heart, let this thought and reflection move it, that you will have hardly quitted this spot when, from pure fear, I shall yield my soul up to anyone that will take it. I left home and wife and children to come and serve your worship, trusting to do better and not worse, but as covetousness bursts the bag, it has rent my hopes asunder, for just as I had them highest about getting that wretched unlucky island your worship has so often promised me, I see that, instead and in lieu of it, you mean to desert me now in a place so far from human reach. For God's sake, master mine, deal not so unjustly by me, and if your worship will not entirely give up attempting this feat, at least put it off till morning, for by what the lore I learned when I was a shepherd tells me it cannot want 3 hours of dawn now, because the mouth of the horn is overhead and makes midnight in the line of the left arm. How can you see, Sancho, said Don Quixote, where it makes that line, or where this mouth or this occiput is that you talkest of, when the night is so dark that there is not a star to be seen in the whole heaven? That's true, said Sancho, but fear has sharp eyes and sees things underground much more above in heavens. Besides, there is good reason to show that it now wants but little of day. "Let it want what it may," replied Don Quixote, "it shall not be said of me now or at any time that tears or entreaties turned me aside from doing what was in accordance with knightly usage, and so I beg of you, Sancho, to hold your peace, for God, who has put it into my heart to undertake now this so unexampled and terrible adventure, will take care to watch over my safety and console your sorrow. What you have to do is to tighten Rocinante's girths well, and wait here, for I shall come back shortly, alive or dead." Sancho, perceiving it his master's final resolve, and how little his tears, counsels, and entreaties prevailed with him, determined to have recourse to his own ingenuity and compel him, if he could, to wait till daylight. And so, while tightening the girths of the horse, he quietly, and without being felt, with his ass halter tied both Rocinante's legs, so that when Don Quixote strove to go he was unable, as the horse could only move by jumps. Seeing the success of his trick, Sancho Panza said, "See there, Senor, heaven, moved by my tears and prayers, has so ordered it that Rocinante cannot stir, and if you will be obstinate, and spur and strike him, you will only provoke fortune, and kick, as they say, against the pricks." Don Quixote at this grew desperate, but the more he drove his heels into the horse, the less he stirred him, and not having any suspicion of the tying, he was fain to resign himself and wait till daybreak or until Rocinante could move, firmly persuaded that all this came of something other than Sancho's ingenuity. So he said to him, "As it is so, Sancho, and as Rocinante cannot move, I am content to wait till dawn smiles upon us, evening though I weep while it delays its coming." "There is no need to weep," answered Sancho, "for I will amuse your worship by telling stories from this till daylight, unless truly you like to dismount and lie down to sleep a little on the green grass after the fashion of knights errant, so as to be fresher when day comes and the moment arrives for attempting this extraordinary adventure you are looking forward to." "What are you talking about, dismounting or sleeping for?" said Don Quixote. "Am I, thinkest you, one of those knights that take their rest in the presence of danger? Sleep, you who are born to sleep, or do as you will, for I will act as I think most consistent with my character." "Be not angry, master mine," replied Sancho, "I did not mean to say that." And coming close to him he laid one hand on the pommel of the saddle and the other on the cantle, so that he held his master's left thigh in his embrace, not daring to separate a finger's width from him, so much afraid was he of the strokes which still resounded with a regular beat. Don Quixote bade him tell some story to amuse him as he had proposed, to which Sancho replied that he would if his dread of what he heard would let him. "Still," said he, "I will strive to tell a story, which, if I can manage to relate it, and nobody interferes with the telling, is the best of stories, and let your worship give me your attention, for here I begin. What was, and may the good that is to come be for all, and the evil for him who goes to look for it. Your worship must know that the beginning the old folk used to put to their tales was not just as each one pleased. It was a maxim of Cato Zanzorino, the Roman, that says the evil for him that goes to look for it, and it comes as pat to the purpose now as ring to finger, to show that your worship should keep quiet, and not go looking for evil in any quarter, and that we should go back by some other road, since nobody forces us to follow this in which so many terrors affright us." "Go on with your story, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "and leave the choice of our road to my care." "I say then," continued Sancho, "that in a village of Estremadura there was a goat shepherd, that is to say, one who tended goats, which shepherd, or goatherd, as my story goes, was called Lo Pruis, and this Lo Pruis was in love with a shepherdess called Toralva, which shepherdess called Toralva was the daughter of a rich grazier, and this rich grazier—" "If that is the way you tellest your tale, Sancho," said Don Quixote, repeating twice all you have to say. You will not have done these 2 days. Go straight on with it, and tell it like a reasonable man, or else say nothing. Tales are always told in my country in the very way I am telling this, answered Sancho, and I cannot tell it in any other, nor is it right of your worship to ask me to make new customs. Tell it as you will, replied Don Quixote, and as fate will have it, that I cannot help listening to you. Go on. And so, lord of my soul, continued Sancho, as I have said, this shepherd was in love with Torelva the shepherdess, who was a wild buxom lass with something of the look of a man about her, for she had little moustaches. I fancy I see her now. Then you knew her? Said Don Quixote. I did not know her, said Sancho, but he who told me the story said it was so true and certain that when I told it to another I may safely declare and swear I had seen it all myself. And so in course of time, the devil, who never sleeps and puts everything in confusion, contrived that the love the shepherd bore the shepherdess turned into hatred and ill will, and the reason, according to evil tongues, was some little jealousy she caused him that crossed the line and trespassed on forbidden ground, and so much did the shepherd hate her from that time forward, that, in order to escape from her, he determined to quit the country and go where he should never set eyes on her again. Torelva, when she found herself spurned by Lope, was immediately smitten with love for him, though she had never loved him before. That is the natural way of women, said Don Quixote, to scorn the one that loves them and love the one that hates them. Go on, Sancho. It came to pass, said Sancho, that the shepherd carried out his intention, and driving his goats before him took his way across the plains of Estremadura to pass over into the kingdom of Portugal. Toralva, who knew of it, went after him, and on foot and barefoot, followed him at a distance, with a pilgrim's staff in her hand and a scrip round her neck, in which she carried, it is said, a bit of looking-glass and a piece of a comb and some little pot or other of paint for her face. But let her carry what she did, I am not going to trouble myself to prove it. All I say is that the shepherd, they say, came with his flock to cross over the river Guadiana, which was at that time swollen and almost overflowing its banks, and at the spot he came to, there was neither ferry nor boat nor anyone to carry him or his flock to the other side, at which he was much vexed, for he perceived that Torelva was approaching and would give him great annoyance with her tears and entreaties. However, he went looking about so closely that he discovered a fisherman who had alongside of him a boat so small that it could only hold one person and one goat, but for all that he spoke to him, and agreed with him to carry himself and his 300 goats across. The fisherman got into the boat and carried one goat over. He came back and carried another over. He came back again and again brought over another. Let your worship keep count of the goats the fisherman is taking across, for if one escapes the memory there will be an end of the story, and it will be impossible to tell another word of it. To proceed, I must tell you the landing place on the other side was miry and slippery, and the fisherman lost a great deal of time in going and coming. Still he returned for another goat and another and another. Take it for granted he brought them all across, said Don Quixote, and don't keep going and coming in this way, or you will not make an end of bringing them over this 12 month. How many have gone across so far? Said Sancho. How the devil do I know? Replied Don Quixote. There it is, said Sancho, what I told you, that you must keep a good count. Well then, by God, there is an end of the story, for there is no going any farther. How can that be? Said Don Quixote. Is it so essential to the story to know to a nicety the goats that have crossed over, that if there be a mistake of one in the reckoning, you cannot go on with it? No, senor, not a bit, replied Sancho, for when I asked your worship to tell me how many goats had crossed, and you answered you did not know, at that very instant all I had to say passed away out of my memory, and, faith, there was much virtue in it. and entertainment. So, then, said Don Quixote, the story has come to an end, as much as my mother has, said Sancho. In truth, said Don Quixote, you have told one of the rarest stories, tales, or histories that anyone in the world could have imagined, and such a way of telling it and ending it was never seen nor will be in a lifetime, though I expected nothing else from your excellent understanding. But I do not wonder, for perhaps those ceaseless strokes may have confused your wits. All that may be, replied Sancho, but I know that as to my story, all that can be said is that it ends there where the mistake in the count of the passage of the goats begins. Let it end where it will, well and good, said Don Quixote, and let us see if Rocinante can go. And again he spurred him, and again Rocinante made jumps and remained where he was, so well tied was he. Just then, whether it was the cold of the morning that was now approaching, or that he had eaten something laxative at supper, or that it was only natural, as is most likely, Sancho felt a desire to do what no one could do for him. But so great was the fear that had penetrated his heart, he dared not separate himself from his master by as much as the black of his nail. To escape doing what he wanted was, however, also impossible, so what he did for peace's sake was to remove his right hand, which held the back of the saddle, and with it to untie gently and silently the running string which alone held up his breeches, so that on loosening it they at once fell down round his feet like fetters. He then raised his shirt as well as he could and bared his hind quarters, no slim ones, but, this accomplished, which he fancied was all he had to do to get out of this terrible strait and embarrassment, another still greater difficulty presented itself, for it seemed to him impossible to relieve himself without making some noise, and he ground his teeth and squeezed his shoulders together, holding his breath as much as he could. But in spite of his precautions he was unlucky enough after all to make a little noise, very different from that which was causing him so much fear. Don Quixote, hearing it, said, "What noise is that, Sancho?" "I don't know, senor," said he. "It must be something new, for adventures and misadventures never begin with a trifle." Once more he tried his luck, and succeeded so well that without any further noise or disturbance he found himself relieved of the burden that had given him so much discomfort. But as Don Quixote's sense of smell was as acute as his hearing, and as Sancho was so closely linked with him that the fumes rose almost in a straight line, it could not be but that some should reach his nose, and as soon as they did he came to its relief by compressing it between his fingers, saying in a rather snuffing tone, "Sancho, it strikes me you are in great fear." "I am," answered Sancho, "but how does your worship perceive it now more than ever?" "Because just now you smellest stronger than ever, and not of ambergris," answered Don Quixote. "Very likely," said Sancho, "but that's not my fault, but your worship's, for leading me about at unseasonable hours and at such unwonted paces." "Then go back 3 or 4, my friend," said Don Quixote, all the time with his fingers to his nose, "and for the future pay more attention to your person and to what you owest to mine, for it is my great familiarity with you that has bred this contempt." "I'll bet," replied Sancho, "that your worship thinks I have done something I ought not with my person. It makes it worse to stir it, friend Sancho," returned Don Quixote. With this and other talk of the same sort master and man passed that night, till Sancho, perceiving that daybreak was coming on apace, very cautiously untied Rocinante and tied up his breeches. As soon as Rocinante found himself free, though by nature he was not at all meddlesome, he seemed to feel lively and began pawing, for as to capering, begging his pardon, he knew not what it meant. Don Quixote, then, observing that Rocinante could move, took it as a good sign and a signal that he should attempt the dread adventure. By this time day had fully broken and everything showed distinctly, and Don Quixote saw that he was among some tall trees, chestnuts, which cast a very deep shade. He perceived likewise that the sound of the strokes did not cease, but could not discover what caused it, and so without any further delay he let Rocinante feel the spur, and once more taking leave of Sancho, he told him to wait for him there 3 days at most, as he had said before, and, if he should not have returned by that time, he may feel sure it had been God's will that he should end his days in that perilous adventure. He again repeated the message and commission with which he was to go on his behalf to his lady Dulcinea, and said he was not to be uneasy as to the payment of his services, for before leaving home he had made his will, in which he would find himself fully recompensed in the matter of wages in due proportion to the time he had served. But if God delivered him safe, sound, and unhurt out of that danger, he may look upon the promised island as much more than certain. Sancho began to weep afresh on again hearing the affecting words of his good master, and resolved to stay with him until the final issue and end of the business. From these tears and this honorable resolve of Sancho Panza's, the author of this history infers that he must have been of good birth and at least an old Christian, and the feeling he displayed touched his, but not so much as to make him show any weakness. On the contrary, hiding what he felt as well as he could, he began to move towards that quarter from where the sound of the water and of the strokes seemed to come. Sancho followed him on foot, leading by the halter, as his custom was, his ass, his constant comrade in prosperity or adversity, and advancing some distance through the shady chestnut trees they came upon a little meadow at the foot of some high rocks, down which a mighty rush of water flung itself. At the foot of the rocks were some rudely constructed houses looking more like ruins than houses, from among which came, they perceived, the din and clatter of blows, which still continued without intermission. Rocinante took fright at the noise of the water and of the blows, but quieting him, Don Quixote advanced step by step towards the houses, commending himself with all his heart to his lady, imploring her support in that dread pass and enterprise, and on the way commending himself to God, too, not to forget him. Sancho, who never quitted his side, stretched his neck as far as he could and peered between the legs of Rocinante to see if he could now discover what it was that caused him such fear and apprehension. They went, it may be, 100 paces farther, when on turning a corner the true cause, beyond the possibility of any mistake of that dread-sounding and to them awe-inspiring noise that had kept them all the night in such fear and perplexity, appeared plain and obvious, and it was if, reader, you are not disgusted and disappointed, 6 fulling hammers which by their alternate strokes made all the din. When Don Quixote perceived what it was, he was struck dumb and rigid from head to foot. Sancho glanced at him and saw him with his head bent down upon his breast in manifest mortification, and Don Quixote glanced at Sancho and saw him with his cheeks puffed out and his mouth full of laughter, and evidently ready to explode with it, and in spite of his vexation he could not help laughing at the sight of him. And when Sancho saw his master begin, he let go so heartily that he had to hold his sides with both hands to keep himself from bursting with laughter. 4 times he stopped, and as many times did his laughter break out afresh with the same violence as at first, whereat Don Quixote grew furious above all, when he heard him say mockingly, "You must know, friend Sancho, that of heaven's will I was born in this our iron age to revive in it the golden, or age of gold. I am he for whom are reserved perils, mighty achievements, valiant deeds," and here he went on repeating the words that Don Quixote uttered the first time they heard the awful strokes. Don Quixote, then, seeing that Sancho was turning him into ridicule, was so mortified and vexed that he lifted up his pike and smote him 2 such blows that if, instead of catching them on his shoulders, he had caught them on his head, there would have been no wages to pay, unless truly to his heirs. Sancho, seeing that he was getting an awkward return in earnest for his jest, and fearing his master may carry it still further, said to him very humbly, "Calm yourself, sir, for by God I am only joking." "Well, then, if you are joking I am not," replied Don Quixote. "Look here, my lively gentleman, if these, instead of being fulling hammers, had been some perilous adventure, have I not, think you, shown the courage required for the attempt and achievement? Am I, perhaps, being, as I am, a gentleman, bound to know and distinguish sounds and tell whether they come from fulling mills or not, and that, when perhaps, as is the case, I have never in my life seen any as you have, low bore as you are, that have been born and bred among them? But turn me these 6 hammers into 6 giants, and bring them to beard me, one by one or all together, and if I do not knock them head over heels, then make what mockery you like of me." "No more of that, senor," returned Sancho. "I own I went a little too far with the joke, but tell me, your worship, now that peace is made between us, and may God bring you out of all the adventures that may befall you, as safe and sound as he has brought you out of this one, was it not a thing to laugh at, and is it not a good story, the great fear we were in, at least, that I was in, for as to your worship I see now that you neither know nor understand what either fear or dismay is." "I do not deny," said Don Quixote, "that what happened to us may be worth laughing at, but it is not worth making a story about, for it is not every one that is shrewd enough to hit the right point of a thing. At any rate," said Sancho, "your worship knew how to hit the right point with your pike, aiming at my head and hitting me on the shoulders, thanks be to God and my own smartness in dodging it. But let that pass, all will come out in the scouring, for I have heard say he loves you well that makes you weep, and moreover that it is the way with great lords after any hard words they give a servant to give him a pair of breeches, though I do not know what they give after blows, unless it be that knights errant after blows give islands or kingdoms on the mainland." "It may be on the dice," said Don Quixote, "that all you sayest will come true. Overlook the past, for you are shrewd enough to know that our first movements are not in our own control, and one thing for the future, bear in mind that you curb and restrain your loquacity in my company, for in all the books of chivalry that I have read, and they are innumerable, I never met with a squire who talked so much to his lord as you do to yours. And in fact I feel it to be a great fault of yours, and of mine, of yours, that you have so little respect for me, of mine, that I do not make myself more respected. There was Gandalin, the squire, of Amadis of Gaul, that was count of the Insula Firm, and we read of him, that he always addressed his lord with his cap in his hand, his head bowed down and his body bent double, more turquesco. And then, what shall we say of Gasabel, the squire of Galaor, who was so silent that in order to indicate to us the greatness of his marvelous taciturnity his name is only once mentioned in the whole of that history, as long as it is truthful? From all I have said you will gather, Sancho, that there must be a difference between master and man, between lord and lackey, between knight and squire, so that from this day forward in our intercourse we must observe more respect and take less liberties, for in whatever way I may be provoked with you it will be bad for the pitcher."